Chapter 151. This action was completely unexpected to Helene Vivian, so when that handsome face that was enough to bewitch any girl approached, her heart skipped a beat. However, Helene Vivian's face didn't show any expression. She didn't even flinch. Her two legs were slightly crossed, and her clear phoenix eyes looked straight into the other's eyes. Her smile didn't diminish in the slightest. On the contrary, the other students who were also eating uniformly looked in their direction with different expressions on their faces. Master. Shadow stood at the side and weakly reminded. He only hoped that His Highness wouldn't flip out on the spot and smash the school cafeteria. However, Beligaju only maintained that posture with a smile that wasn't a smile. He slowly moved closer to Helene Vivian's ear and said in a low and sexy voice, "If the honored guest is you, I can actually consider selling my body and not my skills." Helene Vivian's ears heated up. She reached out and pushed him away. Looking at the living Evildor in front of her, her long, shapely eyebrows slightly raised, "Stop messing around. If we wait any longer, the sky will be dark. It's not good to make people wait. There's someone else." Beligaju also didn't have the mind to let people admire him. He leisurely adjusted his collar and glanced at Helene Vivian, his long eyebrows wrinkling. Helene Vivian made a sound and explained the situation to him. "I don't know what stage your martial chi is at, but there's no harm in increasing your own strength. It just so happens that someone suggested that they can help us with tutoring." "Oh." Beligaju lazily raised the corner of his mouth. On the surface, he looked quite interested. However, those familiar with him knew that this was mostly perfunctory. Shadow followed behind the two people, his mouth wide open. In Dragon War Empire, there shouldn't be anyone who can tutor His Highness. Helene Vivian also knew that his enthusiasm wasn't high. Her thin lips carried a smile. "The tutor is Huan Mingxiong." Beligaju's fingers paused. He slowly raised his eyes, but didn't say anything. Shadow was completely stunned. "Elder Huan? Then wouldn't His Highness' status be, you know Elder Huan as well?" Helene Vivian's sharp eyes swept over Ying's reaction and her phoenix eyes deepened. For a moment, Shadow was unable to react. His fingers stiffened as he tried to think of an excuse. He was afraid that one wrong word would ruin His Highness' plans. However, Beligaju merely glanced at him indifferently, and still spoke with an unhurried tone. "We've met a few times before. Elder Huan is an elder of 3 generations. There's no one in the War Dragon Empire who doesn't know him. I didn't expect you to have met before." Helene Vivian smiled. "That's good. Let's give him a surprise." On one hand, Shadow was admiring His Highness' acting skills, but on the other hand, he felt a headache coming on. He thought that this definitely wouldn't be a pleasant surprise for Elder Huan. It was more like a scare. "Yes." Beligaju's thin lips slowly curved up as he lowered his arm. "After coming to the White Academy for so long, I haven't met him yet. Indeed, I should give him a surprise." When Ying saw that smile, his body trembled. His Highness wanted to take revenge on old Huan for slandering him last time. Absolutely. However, Elder Huan doesn't want other people to know that he's in the academy. Helene Vivian shrugged her shoulders and lightly laughed. "So, you understand." Beligaju curved his lips. "I understand." As it turned out, his soft spot was here, Achu. In a corner of the trading courtyard, an old man who was sweeping the floor suddenly sneezed. He turned his head to look. Was it going to rain soon? Why did he keep feeling that his back was cold? Huan Mingxiong rubbed his back and decided to put the matter of sweeping aside for now. He looked in the direction of the setting sun. That girl should be here in a moment. It just so happened that he could take advantage of the little time he had left to think about how to teach people. Sigh, an Earth-ranked martial artist. Huan Mingxiong couldn't help but sigh deeply. Shaking his head, he entered the library pavilion. On the other side, in the superior compound, which was filled with talents, there was a great hall within the compound that received a lot of attention. It was said that the students who could enter this great hall were all 1 in 1,000 geniuses. Here, apart from the people in charge of each compound and the dean, even the teachers didn't have the qualifications to take half a step inside. The entire hall only had a single white stone pillar that reached the sky. The incomparably luxurious night pearls were like specks of starlight adorning the night sky. Floating above the hall were armaments flashing with light. Every time someone stepped in, they would vibrate in resonance. There wasn't a single one that wasn't mysterious, there wasn't a single one that wasn't stunning. Under the dome, there was a lingering fog that didn't disperse all year round. That was a barrier propped up by a superior cultivator. It was invincible, gentle and sacred, like a fairyland, making people gasp in admiration. When Murong Changfeng, Helian Jiawa, 7th Prince, as well as Yuan Ling Xian entered, they couldn't help but be shocked. Even though they were born in aristocratic families, it was also the first time they saw this kind of scene. It was almost inviolable. Some people said that this was a temple left behind from ancient times. The man who had once conquered the entire divine continent lived here. Later, the man was sealed, and this place also became a wasteland. In the end, the Dragon War Empire accepted the management, and White Academy was responsible for the reconstruction. Until today, this temple had already existed for more than 1,000 years. Its extravagance was something that no other temple could compare to. Even the imperial palace might not be able to reach this level. Today, I called you all here to tell you one thing. Tu Su Feng's black hair and white clothes slowly walked over. His voice also carried gentleness. This academy just received a notice that you all have been selected by the Battle Spirit Forces. As he spoke, he slowly swept his gaze over the 4 people in front of him. In the end, his gaze landed on Little Bald Head, who was eating a steamed bun. With a bit of pampering helplessness, he said, "You all come from aristocratic families. There's no need for this academy to explain. You should all clearly understand what the 3 words Battle Spirit Forces mean. This is the first time in recent years that they've selected new students. You're very lucky to have been selected as soon as you arrived. There wasn't a single person who wouldn't be excited after hearing this kind of news." No matter how arrogant Yuan Ling Xian was normally, at this moment, his face was also filled with excitement. Helian Jiawa even more hated that she couldn't publicize this matter to the entire academy. Murong Changfeng was the calmest of the 3 people, but he also clenched his fists. He'd waited for this moment for too long. It could be said that in order to enter the Battle Spirit Forces, he'd put in a lot of effort. However, the Battle Spirit Forces also put forward a request. Tu Su Feng lowered his finger, his eyes carrying a smile. If you want to truly become a member of the Battle Spirit Forces, you must let them see your strength. In this time's competition within the academy, the Battle Spirit Forces requests that you all win all 4 matches. Yuan Ling Xian smiled, completely confident. That's simple. Helian Jiawa also curved her red lips. Her meaning was obvious. Any one of the people from the superior compound could completely defeat the other 3 compounds, not to mention that the 4 of them were people selected by the Battle Spirit Forces. The result was already very clear, they couldn't possibly lose. Although Murong Changfeng didn't express anything, that arrogant and imposing expression also expressed the same meaning. Only the 7th Prince, Little Bald Head, had a slightly tangled expression. Chapter 152. Tu Su Feng glanced at them, a trace of light flashing through his eyes. His smile was warm and sincere. "So to speak, you don't need to adjust your order in the competition. I've seen your name list. It says that if the inferior compound enters the finals, only Yuan Ling Xian will compete. The rest will be substitutes. Isn't this method inappropriate? To deal with those people from the inferior compound, I alone am enough." The corners of Yuan Ling Xian's mouth carried a smile, but it was hard to conceal his condescending disdain. What's more, whether or not they'll be able to last until the end and face us is another matter altogether. Tu Su Feng lightly smiled and made a no sound, but didn't continue to ask Yuan Ling Xian anything. Instead, he turned his head towards the little baldy and asked, "What about you? What do you think?" The only one who knew of that brat's identity was only this little nephew of his. He really wanted to see his 2 brothers fight. The 7th Prince looked at him with the vigor of a tiger and took a bite of the meat bun. "As long as the inferior compound doesn't let me fight, I'm fine with anything else." In any case, he'd already decided that he had to avoid fighting with 3rd brother. Only, He didn't expect that these words would have a different meaning in the ears of Yuan Lingxian and the others. Dean, you see, even the seventh prince knows who's worth fighting with and who's not. The disdain on Yuan Lingxian's mouth became even stronger. Even the Hellion Jiaowa on the side laughed. It's still the seventh prince who's reliable. The little baldy looked at the two laughing together, then lowered his head and took another bite of the meat bun. His cheeks bulged, and his small eyebrows wrinkled. He didn't know how to tell them that the reason he didn't compete wasn't because it wasn't worth it, but because he didn't dare. Especially after he knew that third brother chose martial qi, he didn't dare even more. He didn't want to offend third brother. When he wasn't obedient as a child, third brother made him stand outside with his little butt bare. He knew that he and the fire Chelene loved to eat meat, but he didn't let him eat. He even said that if he was seen naked, he wouldn't be able to marry a wife in the future, let alone have meat to eat. The little baldy still remembered this incident vividly. For the sake of being able to marry a wife and eat meat, he didn't commit any more crimes. He was afraid that his third brother would make him perform the rabbit dance for the palace maids again. He was a grown man now, so he couldn't be so casual. You'll be loved. Little Bald Head very seriously began to count how many palace maids would blush when they saw him ever since third brother made him do the rabbit dance. Thinking about it carefully, there were too many. His fingers were not enough. Tu Su Feng was worthy of being the one who had been with the little seventh prince the longest. With one look at the little guy's adorable tiger face, he knew that this disciple of his had started to daydream again. However, do you guys really think that those students from the inferior compound are nothing to worry about? Tu Su Feng's movements were graceful as he placed both of his hands on the table. His tone carried a deep meaning. Murong Chang Feng, who hadn't spoken the entire time, smiled faintly and opened his mouth. Dean, are you trying to say that these new students were all chosen by you, so we should be extra careful? Tu Su Feng smiled. It's not because I chose them, but because they are indeed worthy of your attention. We'll take the dean's words to heart. After all, Murong Chang Feng was Murong Prince Mana's heir. His words and actions were much more steady than Yuan Lingxian's. However, the order of the competition was also decided by our superior compound's elders. We're only following orders. Since the elders feel that Lingxian alone is enough to compete, then there shouldn't be any problems. Dean, you're currently the person in charge of the inferior compound. I can understand your feelings, but the matter of the competition should be left to its natural course. We still have to thank you for your guidance. If we really go up against the inferior compound, Lingxian will also be extra careful. Hearing this, the smile on Tu Su Feng's lips became even wider. Since you all think this way, then this dean won't say anything more. I wish you all the best, and strive to win all 4 rounds. Yes. The 3 people smiled at each other, then walked out of the main hall one after the other. As they walked back, Yuan Lingxian's thin lips slightly pursed. I don't know what kind of ability those pieces of trash have, for the dean to think so highly of them. The dean is the person in charge of the inferior compound. It's only natural that he'll lean towards that side. Murong Chang Feng's expression was indifferent as he straightened out his sleeves. However, if we want to guarantee that the 4 rounds are absolutely safe, then we really need to change our order of appearance. However, it's not against the inferior compound, but against the fine compound. When we go up against the fine compound, we must all appear. Yuan Lingxian thought for a moment and felt that this suggestion was very practical. He nodded and turned his head to look at the little baldy. Seventh Highness, there shouldn't be any problems with the fine compound, right? As long as it doesn't make me fight the inferior compound, it's fine. The little baldy still said the same old words. This made Yuan Lingxian smile again. Then it's settled. The rest won't change. When we go up against the fine compound, we'll all appear. Good. The Hellion Jiaowa didn't care what the order of appearance was. In her mind, there wasn't a single compound's new student that could compare to their superior compound. Even though Yuan Lingxian and Murong Chang Feng didn't say this, their performance was no different from the Hellion Jiaowa. From their strategic deployment to the order of appearance, There wasn't a single thing that didn't show that only the fine compound's Hay family's second young master was worthy of them giving him a second glance. The rest of the people were simply no different from bystanders. However, what they didn't know was that some people lost because they underestimated their opponent and were arrogant. Just like this, the news of the Battle Spirit Forces selecting candidates spread throughout the entire academy in less than an hour. Because the Battle Spirit Forces required the selection of candidates to be strictly confidential, no one knew who would be selected. However, they could only think of it by association. Apart from those few geniuses from the superior compound, no one else could guess. As a result, once this news spread, the Hellion Jiaowa and the others once again became the topic of discussion within the academy. The old man sweeping the floor listened to those students discussing one after another. His pair of eyes narrowed, but he didn't say anything. As before, he calmly held the broom, doing his job. After those students all left, he put away the broom and circled to the rear courtyard, shaking his head. The figure following beside the old man naturally saw through what he was thinking and lightly laughed. Young people can't keep their cool. Thinking back to when I was selected, I also wanted to let everyone know. That girl wouldn't be like this. After the old man finished speaking, he seemed to be angry with himself again. Forget it, forget it. Let this old man think a little, the figure laughed. Elder Huan shouldn't think for too long. What's more, once this time's competition ends, the candidates will be determined. Even if Elder Huan wants to change, you can't. Elder Huan should think carefully about how to instruct that Earth-ranked martial artist that Miss Hellion brought. Chapter 153. Hearing what was said, Huan Mingxiong's back stiffened. He silently extended his hand and took out the Earth-ranked Divine Cultivation book he found before. The more he read, the more he felt that this thing was written a bit nonsensical. However, it was enough as a guide. Huan Mingxiong turned his head and said to the shadow, "It's about time. You go do what you need to do. This old man has to keep his appointment." "Yes." The shadow respectfully withdrew. Looking at the old man's departing figure, he couldn't help but secretly sigh. This was the first time he saw Elder Huan put so much effort into someone's matter. It seemed that in Elder Huan's mind, he still felt that the eldest Miss Hellion should be chosen. Only, how could an Earth-ranked martial artist deal with the geniuses of the superior compound? The outcome of this competition was predetermined from the beginning. It was very clear that no matter how powerful the eldest Miss Hellion was, she still had no way to reverse the situation. The sun was setting. It was truly the time of encountering the devil. In a corner of the trading courtyard, the radiance slanted down, painting the surroundings into a boundless golden color. The entire earth was enveloped in an extremely enchanting orange radiance. The clear blue sky was as pure as the tranquil sea. Occasionally, a large black bird would let out a loud cry in the sky. The white clouds were like silvery white velvet, covering the azure sky. The radiance projected down from the gaps in the lush tree canopy, forming swaying specks of light around her. The specks of light were once again shattered by the enormous green tree canopy, projecting onto Hellion Vivian's face, making her squint her eyes comfortably. Following that, she stretched her body and said to Beligaju, "Elder Huan should be here soon. You sit here first, I'll go out and take a look." "Okay." Beligaju held the teacup in his hand, his fingertips lightly turning it. At this moment, that pair of narrow and deep eyes also seemed to be dyed with a thick golden color, giving people a kind of mixed blood charm. Hellion Vivian couldn't help but think of the word Evildor in her mind. As she strolled out, Huan Mingxiong just happened to be walking over with a broom. "Where's that deskmate of yours? Why don't I see him?" Huan Mingxiong's originally hunched back straightened up. Once the disguise was gone, he immediately had the immortal air of an old man. Hellion Vivian was just about to say that he was inside when she saw the man walking towards them. Hellion Vivian turned her head and smiled at Huan Mingxiong, "His coming. Okay, but this old man has to tell you in advance, no matter how hard you train in Earthrank, you won't be able to enter." Huan Mingxiong hadn't even finished speaking when all of his words were suppressed in his throat following the appearance of that figure. Even his brown eyes widened as the figure approached. It was as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. His old face, which had always been calm, was filled with astonishment. The man's chiseled side profile looked as exquisite as an ice sculpture under the bright light, but at the same time, it revealed a sense of indifference. That indifference seemed to be dyed in color in this place, and it was even more vivid. His tall figure stood there, his amber eyes were like the pure and holy light of dusk, suffused with a cold golden light. His black robe fluttered in the wind, gracefully floating in the air like black smoke, wrapping around his slender and powerful body. Just like that inkstone ink, rice paper, and lake brush, spread out on a red sandalwood table. Every stroke of the brush, black and white, were distinct, dripping and distinct. It was as if all of the rivers and mountains were nothing more than a snap of his fingers. Kwon Ming-seong looked at that unique and unmatched face and was completely bewildered. His entire person seemed to have been struck by lightning, charred on the outside and crispy on the inside. Who could tell him what was going on? How could that icy brat, who made people gnash their teeth at the mention of him, become some earth-rank martial artist? Elder Hwan, long time no see. The royal family was black-bellied. In order to avoid Hellion Vivian discovering something, when Hellion Vivian mentioned Kwon Ming-seong, he said that he had met him once before. If this was the case, it could also explain why the old man was so surprised to see him. Kwon Ming-seong heard that extremely polite voice, and his scalp went numb. He pulled Hellion Vivian to the side. What's going on? What do you mean what's going on? Hellion Vivian made a no sound, then laughed. I only found out today that you two knew each other before. But don't worry, Elder Hwan, my deskmate's mouth is very tight. He won't tell anyone about you in the academy. Kwon Ming-seong became anxious. I'm not asking about this, I'm asking if he's really your deskmate. That's right. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows in amusement. Is it so strange for me to have a deskmate? Kwon Ming-seong's fingers paused. In other words, he's also in the inferior compound. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. Elder Hwan, why are you so strange today? Kwon Ming-seong finally realized that something was wrong. Looking at the young girl's smiling eyes, he suddenly raised his eyebrows. You don't know that he, Elder Hwan. Kwon Ming-seong hadn't finished speaking when he was interrupted by a graceful and bewitching voice. Belegaju looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. He leisurely placed the teacup in his hand to the side and leaned his body. I heard Wei Wei say that you want to guide me in martial chi. To be able to receive your guidance, I'm very honored. Kwon Ming-seong really couldn't describe the feeling in his heart right now. It was a bit like eating an apple halfway and then eating a worm. He couldn't get up or down, and he was in a panic. Who could get rid of this icy brat? Seeing him, he really had a bit of indigestion. There's not much time left, why don't we chat while practicing? Belegaju strolled to Kwon Ming-seong's side and smiled evilly. Just in time, I have some matters that I want to discuss with Elder Hwan alone. Kwon Ming-seong stretched his neck and shouted, this old man has nothing to talk about with you. How did this junior offend Elder Hwan? Belegaju raised his good-looking eyebrows and appeared to be very sad. This junior can change. If it really doesn't work out, this junior can also tell grandfather and have grandfather come to this academy to see Elder Hwan. Hearing the two words grandfather, Kwon Ming-seong's movements suddenly froze. He turned his head and fiercely said to Belegaju, you, come with this old man. Yes. Belegaju's special voice always gave people a kind of indifferent feeling when he said it, as if he was being perfunctory. Hellion Vivian watched the two people walk into the courtyard and begin practicing martial chi. Her eyebrows raised, and then she smiled. Generally, the more Elder Hwan liked someone, the greater his mood would fluctuate. It seemed that this deskmate of hers was very much to Elder Hwan's liking. Hellion Vivian relaxed her mood and lazily leaned back. She didn't mind that the teacup in front of her had been used by someone else. After taking a few sips, she took out a few martial components that she always carried with her from her pocket and began to assemble them. She didn't pay much attention to the movements in the courtyard. Chapter 154. Besides using retired emperor to pressure people, what else do you know? Kwon Ming-seong assumed a stance while glaring at Belegaju with extreme indignation. Stinking brat. Belegaju's smile faded, and he said indifferently, I know many other things. For example, telling everyone your identity. You. Huan Ming-seong gnashed his teeth. What do you want to do? Beligaju smiled, a trace of wickedness seeping into his bones. What can a gigolo like me do? When the 3 words gigolo came out, Huan Ming-seong seemed to choke and began to cough heavily. Very good. Beligaju continued to speak, his voice neither cold nor indifferent. It seems that Elder Huan still hasn't forgotten the matter of spreading rumors that I'm a gigolo. Huan Ming-seong looked at the side of his face, completely defeated. I won't unmask you in front of that girl, okay? Wasn't this the reason why this brat had suddenly interrupted him? However, what the hell was he doing? Dressing like this to White Academy, and even going to the inferior compound. If those teachers were to find out, wouldn't they go crazy? For Elder Huan to be able to do this, it's naturally not bad, but... Beligaju moved his sleeves, his low voice carrying a sense of danger. In the future, when Elder Huan mentions me, it's best to speak according to the facts. Huan Ming-seong didn't understand and raised his eyebrows. What do you mean by speak according to the facts? He had never lied to anyone. For example. Beligaju paused, his eyes widening. My heart is very soft and very kind, a husband worth entrusting a lifetime to. Huan Ming-seong heard this and the corner of his mouth twitched. His entire person felt a bit unwell. Your heart is very soft and very kind. You. He really wanted to ask this icy brat, when he said these words, did he not feel the least bit ashamed? It was very clear that Beligaju didn't. He calmly withdrew his gaze, his entire body full of self-restraint. Me. Do you believe it yourself? Huan Ming-seong chuckled. Beligaju's gaze swept over Huan Ming-seong's face without the slightest ripple of surprise. Evaluating this sort of thing is originally meant for others to hear, to make others believe. I believe that Elder Huan can do it. Huan Ming-seong, he was forcing him to lie with him. He had already said that this icy brat had a belly full of black water. Whoever provoked him would be reduced to ashes. Well, since we've reached a consensus, let's start with martial chi. Beligaju paused for a moment. What stage of martial artist did she tell you about me? Huan Ming-seong raised his head and gazed at the sky. Earth rank. He swore that this was the most fraudulent earth rank he had ever seen in his life. Earth rank. Beligaju furrowed his beautiful eyebrows and pressed his fingers to his forehead. He seemed to be having a headache at this stage. He lowered his eyes and thought carefully for a moment. Then, he moved his fingers and his entire body emitted a faint yellow light. Huan Ming-seong stared blankly for a moment, his eyes surging with stormy waves. He was clearer than anyone about the strength of this brat in front of him. Ever since he became the leader of the battle spirit forces for the first year, he began to earnestly urge this icy brat to join. However, every time, he returned without success. As early as 10 years ago, Beligaju had broken through to the 10th level of the gold rank, reaching the peak that everyone envied. However, the heavens were jealous of heroic geniuses. A fire that no one could have predicted pulled this proud son of heaven down from his altar. At that time, he thought, there should be a chance now. Even if he didn't personally go out to fight, this icy brat's comprehension of martial chi could still become a well-known figure in the battle spirit forces. However, the result was still the same. Not only did he not agree, he even closed the door to everyone. So much so that when Huan Ming-seong thought of him later, he felt a burst of pity. Don't look at how he talked about Beligaju in front of Hellion Vivian. In reality, the disciple he wanted to accept the most in his life was this stinking brat. He originally thought that this person had lost all of his martial chi, but with a wave of his hand, he changed the attribute of his martial chi. This could only mean one thing. Right now, on this scoundrel's body, not only did he have the 10th level of the gold rank martial chi, but he also had other attribute martial chi. This was simply 100 years, no, a rare genius that only appears once in 1,000 years. Even if it was him, at this stage, at this age, he only grasped 2 types of martial chi, and it would only appear in times of crisis. Because martial chi attributes were originally mutually restraining and nurturing, when a martial artist advanced to the next attribute, they wouldn't have the attribute of the previous level. Otherwise, it would be very easy to go berserk and break all of the meridians. Unless it was an innate ability, then one could simultaneously control more than 2 martial chi attributes. Right now, the most shocking thing was that Huan Mingxiong simply didn't know how many types of martial chi Beligaju was using at the same time. Just as he was thinking this, he saw a red light flash in front of him. When he looked at Beligaju again, his entire person seemed to have walked out from the blazing sun. His entire body was domineering and bewitching. Fire, that was the fire element. Huan Mingxiong's fingers loosened, even forgetting to exchange moves. He blankly stood in place, then suddenly laughed out loud. Good, really good. Worthy of being called the #1 young master in the world. This time, he had the confidence to make the other leaders of the battle spirit forces all agree with his word. He wanted to change. Immediately change. Hellion Vivian didn't know why Huan Mingxiong looked so excited, but when she saw the red light emitted from Beligaju's body, she also laughed. Not bad, you advanced. He withdrew his hand, and the swelling martial chi also followed suit and gradually subsided. When not even the slightest trace of the flame could be seen, Bailey Jiaoju curved his thin lips and turned to look at Huan Mingxiong. His evilness overflowed. It's all because Elder Huan taught me well. At certain times, His Highness was still very modest. Like this, we can deal with the next match. Hellion Vivian turned her head and said to Huan Mingxiong, I still have to thank Elder Huan for his guidance. Ah! Huan Mingxiong returned to his senses, lightly coughed twice, and pretended to stroke his white beard. No need to thank this old man, you just have to perform well. The best would be to win all 4 matches. At that time, he would have an even more perfect excuse to change people. Thinking about it carefully, seeing this icy fellow wasn't a bad thing. Hellion Vivian was also happy. Being able to make a huge profit, who wouldn't be happy? Huan Mingxiong once again stroked his beard, his gaze falling on the man's flawless face, his eyes full of deep meaning. Who would have thought that the Grand Third Prince would live in the inferior courtyard? It was this kind of unexpected accident that made this competition, which was originally destined to have a good ending, full of variables. He was really looking forward to tomorrow's arrival more and more. Chapter 155. Early morning the next day, a gentle breeze blew. All the students and teachers were gathered in the center of the academy. They were all dressed in green and white robes, unspeakably grand and beautiful. At this moment, at the venue's judges' table, Tu Sufeng smiled as he looked at those young faces below. When his gentle and elegant eyes fell on Wei Wei and the others, a trace of profound meaning flashed through his eyes that only he himself could understand. The one sitting next to him was none other than White Academy's Master Tu Laro, who had always been absent. He smiled as he stroked the white beard on his chin. He chuckled and said, How nostalgic. When this old man was young, it was during the Academy's examination that I found out that compared to martial chi, I was more suited for martial cultivation. Now, looking at them is like looking at myself when I was young. Truly, time waits for no man. Yes, this old man still remembers that at that time, you were also at the superior compound and participated in the competition together with Jizun. Yun Xiu and I were miserably oppressed by you too. The superior compound's master shook his head and said, At that time, you were much more arrogant than you are now. You even said that even if we were old, our disciples still wouldn't be able to win against your disciples. You actually did well, accepting Lord Murong as your disciple. Jizun, that cold temperament, chose this and that, yet he chose a low-level martial artist who had never come into contact with martial cultivation. I really don't know what he was thinking. Tu Laro smiled and didn't answer this topic. He only said, At that time, I was young. Looking at these children now, maybe we can meet some good seedlings. Our superior compound has a few. Master faintly smiled, their strength is not bad. Tu Lao, you can actually consider them. Tu Laro made an O sound, then said, I actually hope to see the strength of the other compounds. It would be best if an unexpected talent appeared. This way, the competition within the academy would be even more interesting. Other compounds. Master raised his eyebrows and indifferently drank a mouthful of tea. His face carried a unique arrogance. Apart from that young master from the He family, what other talents could there be? This old man has investigated the new students of the fine and good compound. As for the inferior compound, even if this old man doesn't say it, Tu Lao, you should also know what's going on over there. Wanting a talent to appear is harder than ascending to the heavens. Tu Lao put down the teacup in his hand and smiled. Principal, hearing Master Bai's words, don't you want to say something for your student? Tu Su Feng originally saw those people yawning and felt a little helpless at their indifferent attitude. Now that he heard these two people bring the topic to him, he gently curved his lips. There's no need to say anything. Let's wait and see the result. It sounds like the dean thinks that those people from your academy are very promising. Master Bai laughed out loud. The ridicule was self-evident. Dean, this old man knows that you treat all the students equally, and this is the first time you personally lead a student, so I want to make some achievements. However, no matter how much you carve rotten wood, it is not as exquisite as jade. Tu Su Feng retracted his gaze from Hellion Vivian and the others, and said with a non-committal smile, that may not be the case, the competition has not started yet, and everything is unknown. Perhaps there will be a result that Master Bai would not expect, so we should just watch the competition carefully. After saying this, he turned his head away, not caring about Bai Jingwen's expression. Bai Jingwen heavily snorted coldly. His mouth didn't say anything, but his heart disdainfully thought, what kind of unexpected result could those trash from the inferior compound have? They were only here to make up the number of people. He reckoned that they wouldn't even be able to pass the good compounds test, and would be done for. If it was up to him, then the good compound should be abolished. Their White Academy had a long history of several hundred years. Not to mention the Dragon War Empire, even in the entire Divine Continent, they could still stand a corner. It was because they had the entire Dragon War Empire's top talents here. And those commoners without any aptitude from the inferior compound were simply here to drag down the Academy's grade. Bai Jingwen lowered his head and drank a mouthful of tea. This time, if the inferior compound still couldn't make any achievements, then the clan elders would have an excuse to propose to the emperor to abolish this compound. Thinking like this, he felt very comfortable. His body leaned back, and his two hands were placed in front of him, as if he was waiting to see how the inferior compound would lose. The students didn't know what the masters were thinking. Every student from each courtyard stood in the same line, listening to the teacher announce the competition rules. The competition was arranged in order from lowest to highest. Today's match was the inferior compound versus the good compound, and the fine compound versus the superior compound. The competition was divided into 2 rounds. Whoever wanted to watch the competition would go to watch the competition according to the order. The contents of each competition were drawn up by the masters in charge. The first 2 matches had the teacher as the referee. When it came to the finals, the masters would personally judge. The most popular was Master Tu Lao. All the students wanted to use this opportunity to speak a few words with Master Tu Lao and ask for an armament that belonged to them. Unfortunately, Master Tu Lao sat too far away. Apart from those who entered the finals who could see him, the rest of the students could only look at him from afar. Once the competition rules were set, the students quickly moved to the 2 large venues. Compared to the fine compound versus the superior compound, the inferior compound versus the good compound's venue wasn't very lively. However, there were still 20 to 30 people who came to watch the competition. Almost all of them were from the inferior compound. The good compound was very few, because they simply didn't place this competition against the inferior compound in their eyes. If they had the time to watch this competition, they might as well go to the other venue first and see the fine compound's strength. When the time came, they could also provide some useful information for their own competitors. The first match, divination match, will be half an hour long. The teacher's aged and deep voice sounded. As the captain, Hellion Vivian was currently lying on the wooden table to catch up on her afternoon nap. Her long chestnut hair had a strand of restless curly hair sticking up. Within her laziness was a bit of a casual feeling. Nangong Lai's lips curved into an evil smile. His pair of beautiful peach blossom eyes looked towards the young ladies watching the competition. Slightly curved, he occasionally blinked his left eye, causing countless young ladies to blush. Compared to these two people, Belagaju really belonged to the normal category. Only, could he not look at the chair as if it wasn't soft, clean, or luxurious enough to deserve a beating? When the teacher saw this, he expressed his anger. He stiffly tightened his grip on the name list in his hand and yelled, "The first match, divination match. Students who haven't yet entered the venue, please enter the venue as soon as possible. Your eyes are really beautiful. Perhaps after I finish the competition, we can go to the commerce compound together for a stroll?" Tchem. Nangong Lai didn't stop playing with electricity. Perhaps it was because he didn't have the sacred identity of the genius priest that he could be so unbridled. This made the young lady closest to him bashfully lower her eyes. She didn't even dare to raise her eyes. She softly replied, "Okay." Rip. The name list in the teacher's hand completely shattered. Chapter 156. The student participating in the divination. The teacher pointed at Nangong Lai. "That's right, it's you. Do you still want to compete or not? If you don't compete, then we'll treat it as forfeiting the competition." Nangong Lai very innocently looked back. His handsome face carried a placating expression. "Teacher, life is so beautiful, yet you're so irritable. Not good, not good. You." The teacher was so angry that his liver hurt. He was just about to say disqualify. Nangong Lai strolled over. The expression on his face changed into a murderous aura. "I'm ready. Let's begin." The teacher stared blankly. In the end, he took a deep breath. "The first match between the inferior compound and the good compound begins now." As soon as his voice fell, the good compound's competitor immediately picked up the divination tool in his hand. Nangong Lai was hesitating whether or not to give the other a bit of face. After all, he was a member of a family of priests. It wasn't good for him to bully a new student with his bare hands. The good compound student standing next to him disdainfully glanced at him. "Trash is trash. You take so long to choose a tool. And so, what gentleness." It was all just a passing cloud. In less than a minute, Nangong Lai finished divining the result. Under the incomparably flabbergasted gaze of the inferior compound student, Nangong Lai walked back to his original position with an evil smile. His body leaned back, slowly and unrestrainedly. He even conveniently poked Hellion Vivian, who was about to go on stage. The teacher stared blankly for a long while before announcing in disbelief. "This match, the inferior compound wins. Pa." The good compound student's divination tool shattered and fell to the ground. He hadn't even started yet. The second match, armament test. The teacher promptly returned to his senses and loudly announced. The teacher acting as the referee hadn't even warmed up his seat when he changed to the next one. He originally prepared a pile of explanations, but unexpectedly, not a single word was used. So stifling. So stifling. Hellion Vivian yawned as she went on stage. Out of respect for the competitors, she curved her lips into a smile. She was serious and courteous everywhere. But what made her feel bad was that the other party didn't appreciate her courtesy. He arrogantly snorted and didn't have the slightest intention of talking to her. And then, the other party was thoroughly tortured to the point of tears. Under the scorching sun, this person could only stare blankly at Hellion Vivian's slender and beautiful fingers, dazzling his eyes as he waited for the referee to announce the result of the match. The armament master was also a bit stunned. He looked at the Xian paper spread out on the wooden table with melancholy. He asked himself why in the world he had to prepare so many explanations in the first place. In the world for what? There were indeed not many people who came to watch the competition, but everyone was dumbfounded. Other than disbelief in their eyes, there was only shock left. The students from the inferior compound, who originally didn't have any hope of winning, even asked their good friends sitting next to them, "Pinch my face. What are you doing?" His friend was also in a daze. The student said, "I want to see if it's true or not." That's right, everyone suspected that they were dreaming and shook their heads absent-mindedly. At this time, Hellion Vivian and the other two had already stood up and were ready to take a stand. 2 wins out of 3. In other words, in the competition between the inferior compound and the good compound, the inferior compound won. Beligaju didn't even take the stage. His white robe hung vertically without the slightest bit of dust. His back was still cold and ascetic, as if he didn't eat the food of the common populace. He only slightly raised his eyes, but it instantly killed the hearts of countless young girls. He's really so handsome. Heavens, my heart is about to jump out of my chest. I wonder what kind of wife he'll marry in the future. Nangong Lai's foot slipped and he was exceptionally indignant. The one who took the stage was obviously me. Why was Arju the most popular? This wasn't fair. Hellion Vivian very unsympathetically comforted him. Young man, don't be silly. This is an era where looks are important. Talent is only an additional point for looks. But other than disliking that stool and table, he didn't do anything else. Nangong Lai was still very unwilling. Hellion Vivian glanced at him. He only needs to be responsible for being as beautiful as a flower. He doesn't need anything else. Thank you. In any case, she had already received benefits. With an extraordinarily handsome deskmate, there would be a lot of snacks. For example, the rose cake that the shy servant girl just sent over was very much to her liking. Let's say first, she wasn't the one who ate it. It was her deskmate who threw it to her. Hellion Vivian actually really wanted to tell those young ladies and pretty daughters of small families to not think about using food to conquer a certain someone's heart. He looked at everything as if he was looking at a cockroach. In the beginning, Hellion Vivian thought that he liked to eat it because when she first gave it to him, his thin lips even curled up slightly, carrying a bit of playfulness. But when she said that the rose cake wasn't sent by her, but by someone else, the man's pair of beautiful phoenix eyes were as cold as a piece of cold jade. Whoever he looked at would be cold. In the end, he directly threw the box of rose cakes onto the table, more unapproachable than ever. Hellion Vivian thought that he must really hate the smell of roses. But it didn't matter, she liked to eat them. Let's go to the other arena to take a look. Nangong Lai smiled evilly. I just heard the young lady who admires me say that the test over there hasn't finished yet. Hellion Vivian made a sound of agreement, smiled and added salt to the wound. Are you sure that young lady admires you, and doesn't want to get to know someone through you? Nangong Lai's face slightly stiffened. He glanced at the person that Hellion Vivian was talking about. He still thought that a Jew wearing a mask was more attractive. Seeing this, Hellion Vivian's smile grew wider. Let's go, we really should go over there to take a look. After all, it's Hazy who's competing. Bailey Jiaju's indifferent eyes paused for a moment, then slowly turned to look at her. A bewitchingly cold smile spread across his extremely handsome face. It seems that you really care about him. His strength is worthy of other people's attention. Hellion Vivian smiled, the sunlight shining into her eyes. Beligaju inexplicably felt that smile was somewhat dazzling. The curve of his thin lips also became very strong, on the other side. In the competition between the superior compound and the fine compound, the first round of the divination competition was only halfway through. The situation was very intense, and it could be said that they were evenly matched. When the people watching the competition saw Hellion Vivian and the others walking over, they raised their eyes with slight astonishment. Aren't they competing? Why would they appear here? It should be over. They came to watch the competition. It can't be. How long has it been and it's already over? How long does it take to deal with the people from the inferior compound? There's no need to think to know that the good compound won. What you said is right. The surrounding sounds of discussion also attracted the attention of the competition area. Hellion Jiao who was sitting in the candidate's seat, laughed as she turned and glanced at this side. What did she say? These good-for-nothings from the inferior compound wouldn't be able to stir up any waves. They didn't even pass the first round, yet they still wanted to face off against their superior compound. Chapter 157. At this time, the divination competition was finally over. The superior compound won by a narrow margin. Little Seventh Prince's bald head also looked towards Hellion Vivian and the others. Compared to other people's schadenfreude, that little face's expression was a bit hard to describe. He opened his mouth and took a bite of the meat bun. He chewed a bit and seemed to have thought of something. After that, He got up and lifted the wooden chair that was taller than himself. That relaxed appearance was the same as when he lifted the meat bun. There wasn't any difference. His strength was really frightening. The surrounding people who saw this scene forcibly sucked in a breath of air. Especially those students from the fine compound. One after another, they broke out in cold sweat for the third martial chi competitor, the Hay family's second young master. Wasn't this seventh prince a bit too scary? He was only 5 years old. Was it really good to be this domineering? Little seventh prince also didn't care about the surrounding gazes. He put the chair next to Hellion Vivian and the others with the vigor of a tiger. After that, he planned to move his short legs and climb up. Nangong Lai raised his good-looking eyebrows and looked at him. He did his utmost to hold back the smile at the corner of his mouth. No matter how impressive this little imp was normally, he couldn't change the fact that his legs were short. However, it was a pity that with this little girl from the Hellion family here, he couldn't hold this little imp in his arms and properly pinch him. Sigh. In order to be able to freely talk about poetry and life philosophy with the young ladies from each family, he still had to endure. After all, once his identity was exposed, it wouldn't be as fun as it was now. Little Bald Head climbed for a long time but still couldn't climb up. That pair of thick little eyebrows tightly knitted together. After that, he gave Nangong Lai a warning look. After that, his gaze fell on Beligaju again. Third brother's side profile looked especially cold. Why was this? Little Bald Head tilted his head and pondered for a moment. He silently moved the wooden chair back a bit. No matter what, he couldn't provoke him. Hellion Wei Wei looked at the little guy who didn't manage to climb up the wooden chair the first time and decided to roll up his sleeves and climb up the second time. She smiled gently, bent down and reached out, picked him up, and placed him firmly on the wooden chair. The little seventh prince was stunned as he felt the soft hair brushing past his cheeks. He subconsciously looked towards Beligaju. Beligaju also glanced at him. His thin lips seemed to move, but there was no sound. In addition, his movements were not obvious, so it did not attract anyone's attention. Only the little seventh prince knew what he was talking about. He awkwardly moved his short legs and stiffly said to Hellion Vivian, "Thank you." Hellion Vivian couldn't help but be amazed by his adorable appearance. Such a punk-style child was really rare in ancient times. What was cool and arrogant was that the meat bun never left his hand. Hellion Vivian smiled. She seemed to have thought of something. She took out the beef jerky that she had prepared earlier and handed it to him. The little seventh prince's eyes suddenly lit up. He silently raised his head, and after seeing that someone didn't say anything, he quickly took the beef jerky. "Good boy." Hellion Vivian patted his head and had the urge to take him home. "Good boy." Nangong Lai was very skeptical of Hellion Vivian's sense of beauty. This woman had never seen the appearance of the little rascal beating people. Holding a stick and fiercely beating people, that posture was even more arrogant than his older brothers. Kai, is this a new way to curry favor? The superior compound spectators laughed out in ridicule. Someone followed up and said, "You guys should just let her interact with the seventh prince. After all, she didn't even win the first match. If she doesn't think of some underhanded ways, how can she survive? If she wants to interact, let her interact with other people. Don't pass on the bad luck to our senior brother." Yuan Ling Xian, who still hadn't gone on stage, looked over and frowned. He then strolled over. "Seventh Highness, how come you're sitting with these people?" The little bald head raised his head and narrowed his eyes. Where he wanted to sit, was it his business? It wasn't that Hellion Vivian didn't hear Yuan Ling Xian's disdain for them. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and lazily looked over at him. Yuan Ling Xian raised his eyebrows and extended his hand, wanting to pull the seventh prince up. "Seventh Highness, it's your turn to go on stage. Let's go. The second match isn't over yet." The little bald head ate the jerky, his voice cold. "Before there's a result, you're not allowed to bother me." Yuan Ling Xian's face stiffened. He was the successor of one of the 4 great clans, yet he was actually being lectured by a little baby. "What?" The little bald head smiled like a tiger, his killing intent quite strong. "You don't like me?" Yuan Ling Xian tightly clenched his fists. How could that be? Seventh Highness is joking. When the imperial family steps down, the first thing he'll do is kill this stinking brat. The little bald head didn't care what Yuan Lingxian was thinking. He continued to eat the jerky and drink tea. He didn't have any other purpose sitting here, he just wanted to prove to his third brother that he was one of their people. Awu, this jerky is delicious. Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. This isn't good. Seventh Highness, it's better to go back. Probably because he was a child, he still didn't understand the difference between the courtyards. The people from the superior compound had always looked down on them. Now that the seventh prince was sitting here like this, although he wasn't very close to them, it was very likely that he would be ostracized by the students from the superior compound. Hearing this, the little seventh prince glanced at Hellion Vivian, puffed up his cheeks, and refused very coldly. It's my turn to compete, I'll go back. Hellion Vivian laughed and shook her head, asking Beligaju beside her, why does he insist on sitting here? I also want to know. Beligaju slowly smiled. That smile didn't reach his eyes in the least. After all, we're not very familiar with each other, so I don't understand. However, I guess that he should be in his rebellious phase. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows, rebellious at the age of 5. The imperial family's people should be different from other people in this aspect. Beligaju absent-mindedly glanced at the little bald head's direction. His voice sounded very casual. I heard that when the seventh prince is excited, he likes to dance naked. I don't know if it's true. Perhaps, if there's a chance, we can appreciate it in a moment. The little seventh prince's small hand that was eating the jerky fiercely paused. His face had an expression of choking. Nangong Lai, who knew the cause and effect of everything, almost couldn't hold it in anymore. He could only hold his stomach, his shoulders trembling as he leaned to the side, holding back his laughter with great difficulty. At this time, Beligaju opened his mouth again, this time speaking to the little bald head himself. His voice was charming. I don't know who is more powerful between the seventh prince and the He family's second young master. The little seventh prince's face became cold. Third brother was giving him a task. He understood. Me. He answered without the slightest hesitation, his face full of vigor. Beligaju smiled meaningfully. I'm looking forward to the scene of the seventh prince beating the He family's young master to the ground. Chapter 158. I guarantee to complete the mission. Little seventh prince nodded. However, how did that He family's young master provoke third brother? Didn't third brother say before that he was a talent? Now he wants him to go fight him. Strange. Little seventh prince scratched his head, picked up the wooden chair and returned to his original position. That walking posture was very domineering. Hellion Vivian looked back and glanced at the man. You have enmity with He Zi? How could that be? Beligaju brushed away the dust on his sleeves, indifferent and harmless. I was only encouraging seventh prince, that's all. Children all need encouragement. Bullshit. Nangong Lai narrowed his eyes as he listened. He had personally watched a certain highness bring up the little brat. There was no encouragement in a certain highness way of teaching. Things definitely weren't that simple. Based on his understanding of Arju, the translation of those words just now clearly meant, little seventh prince, go, cripple him for me. Nangong Lai stroked his own smooth chin and started to recall whether or not he had just missed something. Suddenly, his eyes lit up as his gaze landed on Wei Wei's body. The corners of his mouth hooked up devilishly. So that's how it was. Arju must have sensed it himself. Things seemed to be getting more and more interesting, but regretfully, the superior compound didn't give little seventh prince the opportunity to go on stage. The second round of armaments was fought by Murong Chang Feng. It could be said to be a complete victory. Everyone looked at the half-burnt sandalwood and couldn't help but sigh. Worthy of being Master Tu Laro's disciple. Lord Murong's armament strength is simply too frightening. How long has it been and he's already defeated his opponent? Worthy of being called a genius among geniuses. Master Bai listened to the discussions below and stroked his white beard. He chuckled and looked at Tu Laro. It's still your disciple who's promising. He's really bringing glory to our superior compound. En. Compared to the other people's exclamations, Tu Laro's mood wasn't very high. If the other person wasn't his disciple, he would have already said it. He would have definitely blocked Master Bai's words. After all, this level of speed, compared to what he saw in the Phoenix building, was simply nothing. But, sigh. He had searched almost everywhere, but he still couldn't find that girl. He didn't know where she was now. Tu Laro almost suspected that this girl wasn't someone from the War Dragon Empire. Therefore, he had been waiting for the martial chi test to be held in the capital of the Divine Land. At that time, if that girl still did not appear, he would have no choice but to give up. Tu Tian lowered his eyes filled with an unknown regret. Yuan Ming saw this scene from within the mysterious illusion space. He let out an evil laugh. Woman, your speed should be at least 3 times faster than his. Hellion Vivian didn't answer, but the smile on his thin lips explained everything. He has always looked down on you. Because you are a piece of trash, he even kicked you aside. He doesn't care about our relationship at all. As Yuan Ming spoke, his lips curled into an evil smile. I wonder what kind of expression he will have when he sees your martial talent. Hearing what was said, Hellion Vivian set her gaze on Murong Changfeng. The corners of her mouth curved. She had always been very enthusiastic about slapping that scumbag's face. Nangong Lai glanced at her and said to Beligaju with a smile that wasn't a smile. It seems that our captain still hasn't forgotten the lord that she has pursued for so long. That kind of expression isn't like her usual self. Beligaju didn't move. He didn't even lift his eyelids. Nangong Lai frowned. Could it be that he guessed wrong? Arju simply didn't care who that Miss Hellion had in her eyes. He didn't know that in the instant he was puzzled. Beligaju raised his head and followed Hellion Vivian's gaze. His bottomless eyes overflowed with ice. His lower jaw was a sharp and deadly charming line, arrogant and indifferent, but no one could deny that Murong Changfeng indeed won beautifully in this match. It could almost be considered a high-level showdown, allowing the superior compound to defeat the fine compound with an absolute advantage. According to the principle of 2 wins out of 3, Little Seventh Prince didn't need to go on stage. This made him very conflicted. Looking at the figure not far away, then looking at the heavy buckle he took off, he very seriously made a decision. He vigorously walked towards the fine compound side of the arena and stood in front of He Ziyi, who was in the middle of comforting his teammate. His voice was steady. Find some time and let's duel. This. He just won, and now he wants to find someone to duel? Little Seven, are you sure you're not provoking him? You're not rubbing salt in his wound? Tu Su Feng had a headache and used his hand to support his forehead. Just as he was about to laugh, someone over there handed over the results of the inferior compound and good compounds competition and even leaned over to say something in his ear. This time, Tu Su Feng really did laugh, but there was also something else in his helplessness. On the other side, He Ziyi was stunned by Seventh Prince's murderous aura. He began to recall where he had offended the little one. After thinking for a long time, he still couldn't think of a reason. He could only raise his lower lip. I refuse. Refused. What to do? Could it be that this time, he really wouldn't be able to escape the misfortune of having to dance around naked? Little Seventh Prince expressed that he was very distressed. He didn't even eat the meat bun as he sat in place and began to think of a strategy. In the end, he patted in front of Beligaju and said with a serious expression, I'll leave young Master He to you. That's right. Right now he was gambling on how much third brother hated that young Master He. If the degree was ordinary, he would always command others to make a move. If the degree was very deep, third brother would probably prefer to do it himself. En. Beligaju raised an eyebrow at him. That en word was very tasteful, and the end of his voice carried a trace of iciness. That's fine too. Then I'll properly entertain young Master He in Seventh Prince's place. Nangong Lai, you're the one I wanted to hit from the beginning. Using Little Seven as an excuse, can you be any more shameless? Hellion Vivian watched this interaction between the adult and child and felt that it was very interesting. You two shouldn't have known each other before, right? Little Seventh Prince's tiger back stiffened, and he didn't speak. Beligaju calmly glanced back and used the same excuse as when he met Huan Mingxiong. We've met a few times. I'm actually surprised that 7th Prince actually still remembers this one. Remember, En. Little 7th Prince vaguely responded. He used the dried meat to rub his teeth, afraid that his teeth would be crooked if he lied. Hellion Vivian still felt that it was strange, and she was just about to ask something. Those people from the fine compound sneered. You can't even beat the people from the good compound, yet you still want to win against our captain. Why don't you take a good look at yourself and see how much weight you have? Chapter 159. Just as he finished speaking, a gust of wind suddenly whirled up in front of him, stuffing his mouth full of dust. Beligaju absent-mindedly walked past him. What's going on? The person from the fine compound roared. Why is it only my side that's windy? Pa. Nangong Lai smiled wickedly and also walked over. The person from the fine compound was angry. What did they mean by this? Ignoring him? Quiet. The headmaster of the academy, who was standing on the testing platform, noticed the commotion and glanced at them with displeasure. The person from the fine compound could only withdraw his fist. He looked at Hellion Vivian and the others, but his gaze was still filled with ruthlessness. This old man will now announce the final results of your 2 matches. The teacher opened the presented paper and lowered his head to recognize the handwriting on it. Superior compound versus fine compound, superior compound wins. Good compound versus inferior compound. That teacher thought he was seeing things. When he read to this point, a trace of astonishment flashed through his eyes. The Hellion Jiaoer and Yuan Ling Xian standing below the platform didn't care at all. Was there still a need to announce? The good compound definitely won. The white-haired teacher took off the reading glasses on his face and wiped them. After putting them back on, he repeated what he just said. Good compound versus inferior compound wins. What? Everyone opened their mouths wide and turned their heads in disbelief. They wondered if there was a problem with the test results. How could those people from the inferior compound win against the good compound? Even if there was one who stood out, it still couldn't be a complete victory. Could it be that something happened to the good compound's people and that's why they lost 2 matches in a row? Murong Chang Feng slightly narrowed his eyes and glanced at Hellion Vivian and the others. The Hellion Jiaoer noticed his gaze and gently opened her mouth. Before, I heard third sister say that the inferior compound had a student who applied for divination. His results were pretty good. It's probably because of that person. What can one match represent? Yuan Ling Xian's lips curled into a mocking smile. Look at the inferior compound's appearance, it's as if winning against the good compound is equivalent to winning first place. Each and every one of them looks like country bumpkins, there's no need to care about them. Only then did Murong Chang Feng retract his cold gaze. He grunted and said, go rest a bit and prepare for the second match. However, the superior compound's master looked at the handwriting on the fine writing paper and faintly wrinkled his brows. He won in such a short time? However, there wasn't much to be surprised about. After all, the other party was from the good compound, and wasn't much better than the people from the inferior compound. Master Bai leaned back and said to Tu Feng, Dean, you must be happy. I didn't expect these 3 youngsters' luck to be so good. They can be considered as a variable. Luck. Tu Feng gently smiled and raised his eyebrows. He didn't say anything to Master Bai. The longer a person was superior, the more he felt that others couldn't compare to him. However, he forgot that the world was big, and there were always geniuses in adversity. Actually, those 3 people really gave him a headache. They had only participated in 1 match, and he had already received 3 complaints. The first 2 people, he could still understand. What he didn't understand was that icy brat shouldn't have competed yet, so how could there be complaints? Tu Feng's slender fingers rubbed his temples. It seemed that before the second match, he needed to have a good talk with those 3 people. Dean, you were looking for us? Hellion Vivian lightly smiled as she pushed open the door to Tu Feng's study. Tu Feng put the fine writing papers on the table. His gentle voice carried a black-bellied low-pressure, sit. Seeing this, Hellion Vivian turned her head and glanced at Nangong Lai. Nangong Lai shrugged his shoulders and looked at Beligaju again. The latter had already sat down in a languid posture. One hand lazily propped up his chin, while the other hand poured himself a cup of tea without the slightest trace of politeness. Hellion Vivian and Nangong Lai glanced at each other and also sat separately, preparing to freeload a bit of food and drink from the dean. The corner of Tu Su Feng's mouth twitched. His face was a bit cold. I received 3 complaints here. That shouldn't have anything to do with us. Nangong Lai smiled very confidently. We haven't been fighting recently, and we haven't jumped over the wall to leave the courtyard. Tu Su Feng glanced at him and continued, each one of them is a complaint against you. Nangong Lai stared blankly for a moment, then lowered his head and began to drink tea. The teacher said that when you were competing, you were unorganized, undisciplined, and even looked down on your teachers. Tu Su Feng put his hands on the wooden table, his eyes faintly. It's just a competition, and you've already violated 3 rules. How did you do it? Hellion Vivian expressed her innocence. I just took a nap before going on stage. Tu Su Feng. You really don't have any sense of organization. What about you? Tu Su Feng decided to simply ask them one by one. Me? I didn't do anything. Nangong Lai's finger pointed at the tip of his pen, and smiled wickedly. I was always talking and laughing with the noble young ladies watching the competition. I simply didn't have the opportunity to do anything bad. Tu Su Feng wanted to rub his forehead again. Competitors can't talk to spectators, don't tell me you don't know that. Was discipline eaten by dogs? Hellion Vivian and Nangong Lai started to look at each other at the same time. Their eyes fell on Beligaju. Both of them wanted to know why he was being complained about. Say it, what did you do that made the teachers unable to tolerate it? When Tu Su Feng looked at Beligaju, he was already helpless. Beligaju twisted his thick eyebrows. The chair we were sitting on was too dirty. So? Beligaju's tone was indifferent. He had no intention of admitting guilt, so I switched chairs with the teacher closest to me. Tu Su Feng. Even they didn't know this. Hellion Vivian and Nangong Lai silently drank tea. No wonder they received 3 complaints. The main culprit was finally found. Simply shameless. You didn't even tell us when you switched chairs. Was this the main point? Tu Su Feng's always gentle and elegant handsome face cracked. He took a deep breath, and his voice returned to its previous gentleness. His eyes were bright. 1 complaint deducted 10,000 taels of silver. Hellion Vivian's heartless smile froze. The total is only 100,000 taels. Now it's 70,000 taels. Tu Su Feng drank a mouthful of tea, his voice slow. I believe that in the next 2 rounds, you should have learned how to respect your opponent and your teacher. Thus, in the second round of the competition, when the inferior compound faced the fine compound, Hellion Vivian and Nangong Lai didn't dare to sleep anymore. Nur also didn't dare to hook up with them. They completely changed their arrogant and unruly appearance from before. They understood very well how to respect their teachers, and even their movements slowed down. The teachers were very satisfied with this situation. The explanations they wrote were finally put to use. Not bad, not bad. It seemed that the fine compound's strength was still stronger. These 3 people from the inferior compound were clearly suppressed to death by the opponent. Chapter 160. On this side, Nangong Lai was seriously going easy on the water. He obviously already knew the answer, but he didn't move his brush. On the other side, the student from the fine compound was immensely pleased with himself, as if he was saying that this kind of level simply wasn't worthy of him competing. And the superior compound's new students, who had already won against the inferior compound, looked at this scene with ridicule. What did I say? They were only able to win by luck. Yuan Ling Xian lazily yawned. There's absolutely no need to continue watching. I'm going to catch up on some sleep. Call me when it's over. The Hellion Jiaowa also curled the corners of her mouth, allowing the servant girl to support her to the pavilion under the shade of the tree. She coldly humphed in disdain in her heart. The dean still shamelessly boasted and even wanted them to change the order of the competition. According to the current situation, They simply didn't need to compete in the third round to win the championship. Because the inferior compound would definitely lose to the fine compound. This was simply unthinkable. No need to watch, we're also going to rest. The Hellion Jiaowa instructed the servant girl at her side. The servant girl quickly helped her open the oil paper fan, following behind the Hellion Jiaowa step by step, for fear that her family's miss would be exposed to the sun. After all, today's sun really was very big. And the respected royal family had indeed never been active under such a big sun before. His fingers, white as ivory, felt very dissatisfied with this uncomfortable temperature. His eyebrows jumped, and his tone was neither cold nor hot. How long are you going to waste time for? Hearing this, Nangong Lai smiled, as if some crazy switch had been turned on. He directly waved his brush and wrote the answer. His speed was so fast that the fine compound student across from him was completely dumbfounded. What kind of situation was this? Was he on steroids? Okay, we won. Nangong Lai confidently flung his long hair, walked towards the seating area, and switched Hellion Vivian to the arena. Beligaju looked at him with heavy eyes. You won. Aha! Nangong Lai was very afraid of the heat. He lazily sat back and shook the front of his robe. Wasn't my posture just now very cool? Beligaju glanced at him and said in a voice as cold as ice, because of your victory, this lord missed the opportunity to fight Hazy. Good, very good. Nangong Lai's scalp went numb. Wait, Arju, listen to me. You can use other methods to deal with that black guy. Really, I can provide you with any secret about him. Oh. Beligaju raised his eyebrows calmly. For example? Nangong Lai said with a serious face, I have a record of all the places he went to. Beligaju smiled, extended his leg and coldly kicked him to the side. He shouldn't have trusted a lunatic. He won. The people from the inferior compound won again? The students sitting in the fine compound's viewing area murmured blankly, as if they were dreaming. How is this possible? This is impossible. The contestant in the armament competition simply couldn't believe that he actually lost to a good-for-nothing who didn't even have a bit of chi. Holding the incomplete armament in his hand, he stared blankly at the opponent. Suddenly, he bellowed, cheating. You're definitely cheating. Cheating. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and didn't look at that student. Instead, she looked towards Hazy. Her meaning was very clear. This is your team member. Can't even afford to lose. Nangong Lai fully displayed his gossipy nature, and said with interest, Arju, look, our captain and the He family's young master are going up against each other. Beligaju's hand holding the teacup slightly paused, and the tea in the cup rippled layer after layer. Ah, this is the rhythm of a fight. Nangong Lai very happily extended his long legs. Let's go, I'll take the lead. The He family's young master, who'd always been known for being overbearing and unyielding, also strolled over. Only, he didn't respond to Nangong Lai's words. Instead, he pressed down on that fellow student's neck, and pressed up. His magnetic voice carried a deep and low tone. A loss is a loss. But the contestant really didn't dare to believe that they were on par with the superior compound. Losing to the superior compound was excusable, but losing to the inferior compound, Hazy didn't care whether that person was willing or not. Holding the back of his collar, he faced Hellion Vivian and said, We lost, but... He paused, and smiled evilly. Are you sure you can win against those people from the superior compound? If you go up against the superior compound again, it won't be in this order. The first match will be martial chi. As far as I know, your team member competing in martial chi has never appeared before, right? Can you really do it? Hellion Vivian frowned. Was he doubting their team's ability? She curved her thin lips, and was just about to open her mouth. Just as she was about to open her mouth, she heard a graceful and bewitching voice ring out from beside her ear. The tone was extremely cold, like the gloomy sound of ice melting in black tea. Under such a scorching sun, it was hard for people not to notice. Do you want to fight? Hazy turned his head to look, only to see a person slowly stand up from the wooden chair. His legs were slender and straight, his waist was lean, and his chest was wide, presenting a perfect inverted triangle shape. He reached out and brushed away the non-existent dust on his clothes, then strolled over to him. His robe fluttered in the wind, and the sunlight began to bloom. Under the radiance, he became more and more beautiful, and at the same time more and more evil, just like the red spider lilies that bloomed all over the demon world. From head to toe, he emitted an indescribable coldness and cruelty. Handsome to the point of being indescribable. He turned his face to the side. The lines of his face were like a quiet and secluded bay, so cold and noble that it made people unable to shift their gaze. There was a grace that differed from the lower demons, a charm that differed from the divine gods. Both good and evil, extraordinarily handsome. Hazy frowned, intuitively feeling that the other party wasn't easy to deal with. No wonder those people from the superior compound all found him unpleasing to the eye. Just based on this face alone, he reckoned that he could attract a lot of jealousy. That was the type that the woman who grew up with him liked. Thinking to this point, Hazy's eyes also carried provocation. He raised his eyebrows and looked straight at the man in front of him, completely unyielding. Okay. Even though they hadn't started fighting yet, the sparks that crackled between the two of them made Hellion Wei feel a headache. She pressed her own temples. She finally understood how the dean felt. This scene really made one feel very helpless. Hellion Vivian also didn't say anything, and directly pulled Hazy's hand over. Her first reaction was to first take away this most impulsive, tyrannical young master. Belagaju's fingers paused, and his gaze fell on Hellion Vivian's body. Following that, his bottomless black eyes deepened. The surrounding leaves were swept up by the wind, and dark blue flower petals soared up, then fell down. Everything seemed to be in slow motion by magic. In that split second, the chill emitted from his body made even Nangong Lai, who was standing at the side watching the fight, tremble along with it. Ju, is he angry? Chapter 161. Why? Just because even Hellion Vivian dragged the Hay family's young master away, so that he couldn't fight. Nangong Lai rubbed his chin and guessed that it wasn't just that. Ju, you. He hadn't finished speaking when Bailey Jiaoju's voice interrupted him. The smile on the side of his face was like a killing order from the devil, incomparably enchanting and gorgeous. It seems that it's time for the prey to properly recognize who she belongs to. As he spoke, he turned around. His long, curly hair, as black as the night, added a bit of enchanting charm to his beauty. Even the few strands of bangs that casually fell from his forehead and stuck to his fair forehead made people feel that he was unbelievably handsome. Nangong Lai swallowed his saliva and looked at that handsome face that was different from the usual ice-cold as frost. He swallowed back the words he wanted to say just now. He was really angry. Creak, the deep blue petals stepped on, making a loud noise. But Belagaju seemed to like the sound of this kind of beautiful thing being destroyed. His handsome face, as if carved by a knife, carried a smile that made people shudder. Shadow followed behind him. His Highness. Belagaju didn't speak, as if he was a bit absent-minded. Shadow didn't know why his master suddenly stopped. He could only stand at the side, trembling. He also didn't dare to remind him that there was still the next competition. Belagaju seemed to have stood for a long time. So long that when he finally knew that the woman wouldn't catch up, he slowly moved his long legs. His robe was rolled up, the silver earring on his left ear emitted a dazzling light, and his long eyelashes cast a faint shadow. His quiet, handsome face looked so harmless, like an angel that had fallen to earth, extraordinarily handsome, unfathomable. Ju. Nangong Lai, who sensed something strange, raised his eyes slightly worriedly. There were still people in the fine compound spectator seats who weren't convinced. They walked over, wanting to reason with Belagaju. But before he could say anything, he was frightened by the look in Bailey Jiaoju's eyes. Bailey Jiaoju used that pair of blood-red eyes to coldly stare at him. Step by step, he walked closer. That appearance was like a poisonous snake, not allowing people to say another word. The man couldn't help but take a step back. He felt as if his face had been cut by some unknown gas, giving off a slight stinging pain. Stupid thing. Belagaju laughed coldly, but no one knew who he was talking about. Along with the crack of the ring on his pinky, A series of catcher sounds were heard. All the teacups placed on the wooden table shattered. The young and strong figure was slowly swallowed up by the setting sun and completely turned into a creature under the dusky light. In the boundless red light, only that green robe could be seen fluttering in the wind, and his demonic appearance was unpredictable. At the moment of encountering the devil, it was as if an invisible hand had quietly swallowed everything. Nangong Lai looked at this scene and frowned. He didn't know if the next match would be able to continue. It was obvious that Ju did not intend to continue. What was it that made him lose interest? Nangong Lai wrinkled his thick eyebrows and let out a long sigh. He put his hands behind his head and his gaze fell on Hellion Vivian. Ha! Although Hellion Vivian was using force to suppress Hazy, she didn't forget to pay attention to her teammates' movements. Seeing Belagaju leave, she originally wanted to leave as well. But she was pulled back by Hazy. She didn't know who he was deliberately doing this for, but he pulled her whole body into his embrace. Don't move. What are you doing? Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows and sneered. You better give me a reasonable explanation. Hazy pressed down on her head, but his eyes weren't looking at her. Instead, they were looking straight at the beautiful figure outside the arena. As if spoiling her, he raised his lips and smiled. What's there to explain? Although we're not in the same courtyard, you shouldn't be so cold to me, good sister. You're crazy. Hellion Vivian sneered and directly punched him in the chest. Hazy coughed heavily and said in a low voice. You're so ruthless. Later, I won't want the bonus, okay? No. Hellion Vivian pushed him away and turned around to leave. Only when she saw the stunned figure did she realize what her partner was up to. So it turned out that he wanted to make his little childhood sweetheart jealous. That's why he did such a strange thing. She couldn't help but wonder if the Hay family's young master was stupid. Could it be that he didn't know that doing this would only push the other party further and further away? Sure enough, the children of ancient times didn't have a high EQ. Hellion Vivian didn't have time to explain to that childhood sweetheart. First of all, she was the captain of the inferior compound. She had to find her own team members first. Fortunately, Belagaju didn't go far. Hellion Vivian chased after him. The first thing she saw was his injured pinky finger. Her eyebrows jumped and she didn't say much. She directly pulled up the other person's hand. How did you get this wound? Belagaju's long eyebrows slightly creased as he turned his head. He was just considering whether or not he should take advantage of this moment to directly dismember this stupid little thing's 4 limbs. Especially her right hand, the hand that had touched others, come a bit closer. Hellion Vivian pulled him towards her side again. Looking at that pretty finger, she took out a white handkerchief and helped him wipe it while saying with a smile. So careless. Belagaju coldly snorted. The more he looked at her right hand, the more irksome it was. I'll help you hold it up. That way, the bleeding will stop. Hellion Vivian naturally held Belagaju's hand. Belagaju's pair of cold eyes paused. Following that, he looked into Hellion Vivian's eyes. Then, he lowered his head and looked at the hand in his palm. It was a slender and strong hand. Although it was slender and beautiful, it was slightly rough because of the thin calluses on the fingertips. He was a very picky person. It wasn't that he hadn't seen hands that were more delicate and fair than hers. But now, he actually felt that it would be a pity if such a hand was really broken. Belagaju furrowed his brows. He thought to himself, I'll give her one last chance. If she's still like this next time, I'll throw the man she touched into the sea to feed the fish. Or I'll just lock her up in my palace. I can build a golden cage for her and then strip her of all her clothes. No one would like someone to touch their prey. This was even more so for him. The competition is about to start. Let's go over first. After Hellion Vivian lowered her head to stop Belagaju's bleeding, her first reaction was to bring her team members to the next venue. After all, the martial chi test was arranged as the first round. If he wasn't there, they wouldn't be able to start the competition. Okay. Belagaju stood there with his eyes lowered. His tall figure was tall and his entire face was covered by a cloak. No one could see his expression clearly. Helly and Vivian also didn't notice the dangerous look in his eyes. Because there wasn't enough time. According to the Academy's rules, all the contestants had to be on stage within a certain time limit. Otherwise, it would be considered as a complete forfeit. Chapter 162. Under the bright light of heaven and earth, on the competition field, Yuan Zixian, wearing a Chinese brocade robe, stood with a cold expression. When he had just received the little servant, he immediately sat up from the wooden couch, his eyes filled with astonishment. Those 3 waists from the inferior compound actually won. What the hell is the fine compound doing? Are they deliberately throwing the game? Yuan Zixian impatiently wrinkled his brows, then sneered. How could he forget? The order of appearance can sometimes affect a team's morale. In the first 2 matches, the martial chi competition was placed at the end. In other words, He Ziyi didn't even appear. If he appeared, it definitely wouldn't be this kind of result. Thinking like this, Yuan Lingxian once again mockingly curved his thin lips. Those waists from the inferior compound actually had quite good luck. Twice in a row, they were able to bask in the glory of the competition system. However, this time, they shouldn't even think about taking advantage of the situation anymore. Presumably, they themselves also knew, so they didn't even dare to come. Yuan Lingxian disdainfully looked at the inferior compound's empty competition area. His voice lazily dragged out as he spoke to the nearby Tu Sufeng. Principal, there's still half an incense's time left. The incense will run out. If they still haven't appeared, then we can only abandon the competition. At that time, you can't cover up for the students on your side. Otherwise, we'll be bitterly disappointed. Tu Sufeng elegantly sat in the inferior compound's manager's seat. After hearing Yuan Lingxian's words, he sipped a mouthful of tea, his tone indifferent. I'm sitting here right now. I don't have any right to judge, so what's there to talk about covering up? What the principal said is correct. Lingxian, you're thinking too much. Stand properly for a while. Sitting to the side, Master Bai stroked his beard, his face filled with indescribable pride. In a moment, you can come down. We're the school's perennial winners. What's wrong with waiting for them for half an incense's time? Don't be impatient. Yuan Lingxian smiled. Teacher, this student isn't impatient. I'm just afraid that the opponents will be scared and won't even dare to come. That would certainly hurt the principal. That's true. Master Bai pretended to be indifferent as he glanced at Tu Sufeng's direction. Dean, do those students of yours have a plan or not? If they want to forfeit the competition, they can directly bring it up. After all, they are usually too arrogant, and are worried that they will lose face in front of so many people. It's not good for them to continue staying in the academy. We can completely understand. Let Lingxian and the others go easy on them during the competition. Why not even show up? Tu Sufeng turned the teacup in his hand, his gentle voice lower than usual. Who told Master Bai that they wanted to forfeit? It's just a delay midway. It's not time yet, so why is Master Bai in such a hurry? Hey, you're right. Why should this old man be anxious? The one who should be anxious is indeed not this old man. Master Bai said in a strange tone as he retracted his gaze from Tu Sufeng. Tu Sufeng sat quietly. His gaze fell on the incense stick that was about to burn out. The errand boy stood beside him, slightly bending forward as if he was reporting something. Tu Sufeng suddenly frowned. At this time, it was unknown who shouted, "The incense stick is about to go out." Tu Sufeng's hand that was holding the teacup tightened, and his deep black eyes also sank. The 3 referees glanced at each other, and then began to pick up the brush. They dipped it in ink, intending to write the 2 words forfeit in front of the inferior compound. Only a bang sound was heard. A hole was kicked in the wall of the field. White dust rose, and 3 silhouettes were faintly discernible. Their auras were different, but each one had an extraordinary bearing. Nangong Lai's eyebrows were half raised. He was dressed in a wanton and unruly manner. He raised his hand to press his hair, and his spotlessly white wrist was tied with prayer beads. He had long and narrow eyes, and a bad smile. He didn't have enough time to restrain his body's evil aura. Even his eyebrows carried a bewitching charm that made young girls blush. Hellion Vivian stood beside him, with a deep and shallow smile that wasn't a smile. Her indolence carried a trace of roguishness. Her left hand leisurely rolled up the sleeve of her right hand, and the corner of her mouth slightly raised. Compared to the other girls, she had a touch of handsomeness. The silver-clothed, black-haired Beligaju stood behind them, and seemed to be slowly walking over. His black hair fluttered in the wind, and his long robe fell into the dense fog of cold air. Yet, it didn't seem to be contaminated in the slightest. Instead, it leaked out an aura that belonged to nobility. It was like a phantom in a withered castle, graceful and calm. Let's go. Hellion Vivian curved her lips, raised her eyes, and paused between each word. Let's let them experience how arrogant our inferior compound is. It was a simple sentence. 3 different temperaments, but extraordinary silhouettes, pulled open a straight line, and stepped into the boiling cauldron of voices in the field. That kind of indolent attitude, as if there was no one else present, seemed to be responding to Master Bai's words. That's right. They were just this arrogant. Master Bai looked at those people, and his white eyebrows gradually knitted together. He coldly snorted in displeasure. This old man has never seen someone enter the field like this. Hellion Vivian and the others didn't care what he said, and directly stood in front of Tu Su Feng. Their voices were clear, and every word was clear. Inferior compound representatives reporting for the competition. The distant referees also couldn't see their faces clearly, but after seeing them hear Hellion Vivian's voice, they stood up and put away their ink brushes. Tu Su Feng raised his head and looked at the 3 students who gave him the most headaches. His tone was gentle. Deduct 10,000 taels, you still have 60,000 taels. Why? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Principal, we shouldn't be late, right? Looking at Master Bai's face that looked like he'd swallowed a fly, she knew that they'd caught up. After the competition, there was a serious conflict with the other side, causing a very bad influence. 5,000 taels. After that, Tu Su Feng unhurriedly turned his head and glanced at the broken wall. Destroying the facilities of the courtyard, 5,000 taels. Nangong Lai refused to accept. We were taking a shortcut. If they hadn't kicked the wall, they wouldn't have made it in time. Moreover, the most important thing was that kicking the wall out was more eye-catching, wasn't it? Tu Su Feng glanced at Nangong Lai, looking like he was considering whether or not to deduct the remaining 5,000 taels. Hellion Vivian gave Nangong Lai a thumbs up. Nangong Lai's lips curved into a smile, more brilliant than at any other time. Tu Su Feng put down the teacup in his hand, his tone unhurried. Refuting the teacher, add 5,000 taels. Nangong Lai, Hellion Vivian. Fuck, what happened to not punishing them? Okay, it's your turn. Go on stage. Tu Su Feng paused, then said again. If you win beautifully, the Academy can consider cancelling all of the previous punishments. Sir Principal, your method of hitting with a stick and then giving a box of dates is too good. At least 2 of the 3 immediately ignited an unusual little universe, their eyes shining as they looked towards Yuan Ling Xian on the stage. The corners of Yuan Ling Xian's mouth hooked up, as if he didn't put them in his eyes at all. His attitude was perfunctory. Since you've come, then hurry up and fight. After you're done, I can still go back and take a nap. Chapter 163. The teacher looked at the referees at his side and nodded. He stood up and heavily coughed twice. Following the sound of those 2 dry coughs, the entire venue regained its tranquility. The teacher's severe gaze looked all around. After seeing that everyone was absolutely silent, he laughed. The finals of the Academy, the superior compound versus the inferior compound. The first round, the martial chi test, now begins. After saying this, the teacher returned to his original position. Master Bai felt that he didn't even need to watch the first round. That was the Yuan family's most outstanding genius. His martial chi attainment was only below Murong Changfeng's. In the entire academy, it was hard to find someone stronger than him, let alone a waste from the inferior compound. What he was concerned about was the second round of the armament competition. It wasn't because of anything else. It was just that the armament competition was different from the other 2 rounds. A written exam was added in the finals. He was afraid that when the time came, it would take too long and the students on their side would become impatient. Thinking about it, the result was already predestined. If he still had to take time out to compete with this group of people who didn't even understand what armament competition was, it was simply a waste of time. He might as well sleep a bit more. Master Bai shook his head. He simply held the purple clay teapot in his hand and began to close his eyes to rest. The spectators watched and let out a long sigh. Look at how relaxed Master Bai is. He doesn't even need to instruct and let young Master Yuan directly go on stage. I reckon that the champion this time will definitely be the superior compound. That's for sure. The first 2 rounds were all divination rounds first. The martial chi test was left to the end. The inferior compound could still deal with it, but the finals are different. The first round is martial chi. Losing the first round is equivalent to losing half of the competition. That's right. That person from the inferior compound, do you know his background? What level of martial artist is he? He's so bold, going up against young Master Yuan as soon as he comes up. I don't know his background, but last time I looked at the Academy's information. It seems his Earth rank. Ha ha ha, Earth rank? Then he's in trouble. Young Master Yuan won't be lenient. Speaking of which, the inferior compound also won the first 2 rounds. This person doesn't seem to have participated in the competition. No matter whether he participated or not, he's dead. Don't forget, that's young Master Yuan. Everyone discussed spiritedly. All of them rejoiced in the misfortune of others. However, when he saw the figure behind him, he couldn't help but gulp. Bailey Jiaoju slowly walked up to the competition stage. His long robe outlined the contours of his shoulders, his tall and straight back, as he stood under the golden dusk, so beautiful that even the heavens and the earth seemed to have lost its place. The people around him automatically made way for him. In his eyes, there didn't seem to be so many people, and Yuan Lingxian didn't exist. His gaze was as usual, sharp, cold, noble, and even some unfathomable emotions. Because of this, it made Yuan Lingxian gnash his teeth in anger. He was born a proud son of heaven. Which one of the officials, big or small, didn't have to look at his face in order to pass their days? Even in the White Academy, the students of these 4 courtyards had to listen to his commands. This poor and pedantic brat actually dared to embarrass him. Yuan Lingxian didn't believe that an Earth-stage martial artist was worthy of his attention. If it wasn't for this brat being too arrogant, he wouldn't even have thought of stepping onto the stage. But now, he really wanted to beat him into a meat patty, especially with that arrogant face of his. He'd definitely properly greet him. Yuan Lingxian took a step forward, lifting his eyelids to look at Beligaju. You should now know the difference between you and this young master. Daring to provoke this young master on the first day, I have to say that you really don't fear death. If I were you, I'd forfeit right now. At the very least, you'd be able to preserve your life. Of course, if you kneel and beg this young master in a moment, this young master can actually leave you half a life. Hearing these words, the first to react wasn't Beligaju, but rather the 7th prince sitting in the superior compound's reserve team. The little one stood up all of a sudden, with an expression like the end of the world had arrived. He actually dared to make 3rd brother kneel to him. This child of the Yuan family had gone crazy. This won't do. After the competition, he definitely had to cut off all relations with the superior compound, so as to avoid 3rd brother's collective retaliation. 3rd brother had never been the kind of person to just beat someone up and leave it at that. What followed after the fight was the most torturous. For example, making him strip naked and do the little frog dance. Oh, heavens! He simply didn't want to remember anymore. The little 7th prince hugged his own bald head and swayed back and forth. His small body was somewhat unable to stand, but his 2 cheeks were puffed up in an adorable manner. It had to be said that this Yuan Lingxian was too stupid. Really, especially stupid. Nangong Lai also thought so. He slowly pulled out a smile, carrying a playful and icy coldness. Putting aside the fire Chilin, Just that man's unfathomable martial qi alone, even 10 yuan ling xians wouldn't be enough for him to beat him up. What kind of reaction would the royal family have? Nangong Lai turned his head and looked at Belegaju's side profile that had turned cold. Yuan Ling Xian still wasn't afraid of death, chirping noisily there. After waiting for him to show off enough, Belegaju finally slowly opened his mouth, only saying 3 words. Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Yuan Ling Xian's expression began to crack. PFFF. Hellion Vivian, who'd heard everything from beginning to end, couldn't hold back. She clutched her stomach and laughed. Instant kill, absolute instant kill. When you hate someone to death, the other party actually asks you who you are. That kind of feeling couldn't be described with words. Yuan Ling Xian's face changed from red to white, then from white to black, changing back and forth. It wasn't brilliant at all. Belegaju still had an appearance that didn't concern him. His handsome side profile was so clean that one could practically see the fine hairs on his face. Yuan Ling Xian was thoroughly enraged. His left hand tightly clenched, then he flipped it up. A crisp swish sounded. The long whip in his hand revealed its shape with a swish. The body of the whip carried sharp thorns, emitting a golden light. Heavens, gold rank. This is the first time I've seen the legendary gold rank. Don't tell me this is the innate talent of the heirs of the 4 great clans. Too amazing. Hearing the 2 words gold rank, Master Tu Laro looked towards the arena. It was indeed gold rank without a doubt. Although the light was still very weak, that kind of sharpness wasn't something anyone could block. It looked like the inferior compound, who'd rushed out like a dark horse, was bound to lose this round. Yuan Ling Xian enjoyed the sighs of admiration from all around him. The corner of his mouth raised in a complacent, sinister smile. How is it? Do you want to beg for mercy? Everyone turned their heads and looked towards Belegaju. Generally speaking, in this kind of situation, the person who'd lost would give up on the competition. After all, the opponent was a gold rank. Facing this kind of ardent gaze, Belegaju really didn't disappoint the crowd. His left hand was still tidying up his sleeves. He unhurriedly tilted his head and glanced to the side. Beg for mercy? Are you talking about you? It was precisely this kind of attitude that made Yuan Ling Xian's chest boil with anger. His palm moved, and the whip suddenly seemed to have a life of its own, transforming into a long black snake. The tip even hissed as it flicked out its tongue. Everyone below the arena was overwhelmed with shock. Just how high did one's martial qi have to be to make a martial cultivator transform into a Dharma idol? How was this a martial qi test? It was simply a massacre. At this very moment, everyone only had one thought in their hearts, and that was that Belegaju wouldn't survive. Chapter 164. The long snake entered the sky, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a huge python, its bloody maw covering down from above. That kind of attack speed was fast, and its imposing manner was great. It simply wanted to kill the opponent. Don't mention an Earth stage martial artist, even if they were similarly at the gold stage, facing such a huge python, they wouldn't be able to escape. Belegaju's entire head entered the huge python's mouth, and the huge python's fangs were about to tear his head apart. Just as everyone was at a loss of what to do, Belegaju slowly opened his eyelids. His originally black pupils seemed to be covered with a layer of pure golden light as he aimed at the huge python's pupils. Because the marble under his feet couldn't resist this strong force, it already cracked open with golden lines. The huge python's fangs finally completely covered down, completely swallowing Belegaju into its belly. Yuan Ling Xian proudly hooked his lips. However, in the next second, his pair of pupils that had always looked down on others couldn't help but violently sway. Because, in the midst of the smoke rising from the ruins, the one shrinking back wasn't Belegaju, but the martial cultivator he was so proud of. How was this possible? What did that man do in the end? Silence, a deathly silence. The spectators were all stupefied, their mouths opened wider than an egg, and the expressions on their faces were extremely marvelous. After a moment, rapid breathing sounded like a windmill. Looking at the scene in front of them in shock, Unprecedented astonishment flashed through their eyes. The huge python that was originally crazily eating people actually lost its previous vicious aura, curling up into a small black snake as if it had been subdued. It continuously retreated backwards, and even had a hint of begging for mercy. However, the man turned a blind eye to all of this, only slowly walking forward. His blue clothes wrapped around his slender figure, and his pure white fur cloak fluttered in the wind, revealing an ice-cold murderous aura. His expression was as indifferent as before, and the curve at the corner of his mouth mixed with a kind of calmness and elegance. It was as if the vicissitudes of life and the scattering of ashes were all but a snap of his fingers. The snake's shadow retreated, only leaving behind pieces of martial cultivators under his feet. Yuan Ling Xian held up those pieces of tungsten with heartache, and just as he was about to say something, he discovered that he couldn't raise his right hand. Creak. Black soles stepped on the ground. Only now did Yuan Ling Xian realize that not only was his opponent destroyed by his beloved armament, what was even more frightening was that his right hand couldn't even move. Could it be that he was also from the 4 great clans? No. Impossible. He had seen all the people from the 4 great clans. The only one whose inner strength was above his was Murong Changfeng. Furthermore, this person had never appeared in the insignia of the 4 great clans before. Then who was he? In the Dragon War Empire, was there anyone more powerful than the 4 great families? Damn it! As if he wanted to spit out the shock in his heart, Yuan Ling Xian madly roared, his voice trembling somewhat hard to conceal. There was a fishy taste in his throat, and a mouthful of blood overflowed from the corner of his mouth. Unable to hold on any longer, he was shaken out of the arena by the indescribable martial qi. His entire body moved towards Master Bai's side. Victory and defeat had already been decided. Master Bai subconsciously wanted to reach out and take it, but his palm followed with numbness, and his face was filled with unspeakable surprise. This was residual energy. Even he couldn't resist the remaining qi. How could this be? Whoosh. The crowd was in an uproar. Almost all of them stood up. Even Master Tu Laro, who was sitting in the judging panel. Genius. This is definitely a genius. Did you guys see? The people who held their breaths could no longer control their excited emotions, and the arena immediately sunk into an indescribable excitement. It was precisely because Beligaju hadn't participated in a single martial qi test before. That was why he was able to achieve this kind of breathtaking effect. If it was before this competition, they were still doubting Beligaju's ability. Now they were shaken to the point that even their blood was boiling. Just like what Master Tu Laro said, this was definitely a genius. Among them, the people from the superior compound and fine compound were so embarrassed that their faces were somewhat purple, as if they had been slapped in front of everyone. The good compound, on the other hand, had been applauding the entire time, because ever since the first competition, they had been thoroughly conquered by the inferior compound, and even said that they would follow the inferior compound in the future. There were even a few students who ran over to ask Nangong Lai if they would accept any younger brothers. Nangong Lai blew his hair, and was just about to refuse. Hellion Vivian faintly smiled and said one word, accept. Tu Su Feng listened to the sounds all around like a tide, and when he heard what was said, he sipped a mouthful of tea, and his eyes slightly brightened. This was Beligaju, the invincible Shen Dao of those years. For so many years, he had lost his martial qi, and trapped himself in the palace. He hadn't moved a single hand, to the extent that everyone had forgotten how terrifying he was when he moved. In the distance, the person who was currently watching this scene, the paper umbrella in his hand heavily fell to the ground, and his pupils swayed back and forth. Elder Huan, this. Heavens, Dragon War Empire still had this kind of genius. Why wasn't he in their battle spirit forces? Logically speaking, for someone of this level, it was impossible to not be noticed. Huan Mingxiong stroked his shining white beard, his long sleeves floating in the air, like an immortal. Now, do you still feel that these people from the inferior compound don't have the qualifications to replace the superior compound students and enter our battle spirit forces? The person choked at Huan Mingxiong's words, and let out a long sigh. However, as rational as he was still very cautious. This only proves that he can. I still haven't seen the other people's abilities. Then continue to watch. Huan Ming-seong stood steadily, but his heart was somewhat apprehensive. If that girl was competing in martial chi, he wasn't worried at all, but martial cultivation really wasn't something that ordinary people could play with. Especially after this competition, the people from the superior compound would very likely change their competitors. If that was the case, then the person she would face would be Murong Changfeng. Excluding the Wu Shuang-gongzi from the martial cultivation aristocratic family, Murong Changfeng, this person, was the most talented person in martial cultivation that they had discovered so far. It could be seen how powerful he was. In addition, he was Master Tu Laro's disciple. Huan Ming-seong almost suspected that this competition would present a one-sided situation. And Helian Vivian herself wasn't worried at all, directly walking towards Beligaju. Her walking posture was very handsome, as if she was leisurely taking a stroll in the back garden. Only when she arrived in front of Bailey Han Bing did she stop her footsteps, freeing one hand and raising it high. Beligaju also curved his lips, slightly raising his slender left hand. Pa! A handsome clap of hands sounded. The two people's bodies unexpectedly carried the same languid aura, almost making people feel that they were very compatible when standing together. Okay, it's my turn. Helian Vivian brushed her sleeves, the corners of her mouth carrying a smile, emitting a faint evil aura. Chapter 165. On the other side, people were still silent, unable to extricate themselves from the shock of the previous match. On the other side, Helian Vivian had already lightly jumped onto the stage. The teacher standing at the side stared blankly, as if he had just recovered from the previous match. He hurriedly adjusted his reading glasses, cleared his throat and said, "The first match, the inferior compound wins. The second match, the armament test, please prepare to enter the stage." Right now, the superior compound is under a lot of pressure. The figure stood up and faced Master Bai's direction to look. After that, he sat down again, his face calm and collected. This match is of the utmost importance to the entire competition. Even if the contestant chosen before is more powerful than the opponent's contestant, they'll still change people. Those new students from the superior compound were clearly a bit flustered from the blow of that match just now. The higher one stands, the more they can't afford to lose. For so many years, they haven't lost once. However, it doesn't matter. Every team will have their own soul. The soul of this team from the superior compound is none other than Murong Changfeng. The one surnamed Bai will definitely send Murong Changfeng out. Not only is it for the sake of winning, but it's also for the sake of reigniting the superior compound's morale. Otherwise, if this match isn't won beautifully enough, it'll affect the next match's diviner. That's because no matter how outstanding a student is, when they truly enter the fighting arena, whether or not the leader can hold his ground is also very important. The figure's analysis wasn't wrong. After the teacher finished speaking, Master Bai stood up. "Head judge, our compound requests a change of people." In the competition, every compound only had one chance to change people. That's why, unlike the inferior compound, the other compounds would arrange for substitute students. This was so that during the competition, they could change out the competing compound at any time according to the situation. It was as everyone had expected. As expected, Master Bai changed places with Murong Changfeng. Murong Changfeng's handsome face tilted to the side, as if he didn't care at all. He extended his hand and took off the weighted buckle on his wrist. His outstanding temperament actually made many people from the superior compound feel their blood surge. "Did you guys see? Lord Murong is actually wearing a weighted buckle on his wrist." In other words, in the previous match against the fine compound, he was wearing a weighted buckle. Heavens! When we were at the fine compound, the speed at which he assembled the armaments was already very fast. I really don't dare to imagine what he'll look like after he removes the weight buckles. Murong Changfeng had long been accustomed to these kinds of praises. The arrogance on his face was clearly visible. Even if he concealed it well, there was still a faint complacency leaking out from the corners of his mouth. Master Bai stroked his beard and regained his calm. He believed that as long as Lord Murong was here, they would never lose. In the previous battle, it was only because they didn't know their opponent well enough that they didn't choose the right strategy. And in this match, it could be said that they knew each other well. Not only was the other party a well-known good-for-nothing in the capital, he was also a hedonistic, arrogant, and unreasonable person. He was pestering Lord Murong like a love-struck fool. This kind of person, any random student from the superior compound would be able to deal with him. However, just like what the shadow said, this time, Master Bai let Murong Chang Feng out, not only to let him win, the most important thing was to get back the face of the previous match. Now, I will announce the rules of the second match. The teacher's line of sight slowly swept over the people below the stage. After waiting for them to quiet down, he said, different from the previous two matches, the second match is divided into two parts. The first part is a written test. The competition rules are very simple. Here, Master Tu Laro has prepared the same armament components for you. You can think about what kind of armament you can assemble using them. You only need 2 or more armaments to win. The time limit is half an incense stick. If you don't complete the task within this half an incense stick's time, you will be directly eliminated. In other words, you can't proceed to the next part of the competition. If 2 people both write 2 or more armaments, the one with the most is the winner. After saying this, the teacher retreated to the side. 2 stone pillars slowly rose from the wooden stage. The armament components placed on each pillar were the same, but what made people feel that the most difficult part of this question was that those armament components were very scattered, and also very unremarkable. To want to make a good armament from these armament components was originally very difficult, but now the Academy unexpectedly required the competitors to come up with at least 2 sets of plans. As expected of Master Tu Laro, even the questions he set were so tricky. Everyone thought, one after another, they looked towards Master Tu Laro's position. They saw that he didn't have much of a change in mood. Although this place wasn't far from the stage, his presbyopia also couldn't clearly see the appearance of the person on the stage. He only lightly stroked his beard, a pair of smiling eyes carried a sense of mystery. This year's students from the inferior compound are actually worth paying attention to. Hehe, I really didn't expect that the one going on stage would actually be a girl. It seems that this match is getting more and more interesting. The judge sitting next to him glanced at him and laughed. Ah, Tu Lao, I say, your eyesight is getting worse and worse. Isn't that the Hellion family's good-for-nothing young lady? You don't recognize her? How could he recognize her? Right now, all he's thinking about is that genius he saw at the Phoenix Pavilion. He doesn't even care about his own disciple. Why would he care about a completely unrelated person? Tu Laro put down the teacup in his hand. You guys should stop making fun of me. This year's inferior compound is indeed different from the rest. I admit this point. The other master's expression was slightly excited. Just now, that student from the martial chi test can directly enter the superior compound. Speaking of which, what is his origin in the end? How come this old man has never seen him before? Tu Laro also had the same doubts, but he himself wasn't very interested in the martial chi genius. What he wanted to see the most was that a dark horse could appear in this armament competition. You guys look. The air has already started writing. It wasn't known who in the crowd said this sentence. Everyone all retracted their gazes, their eyes brimming with astonishment. So fast? It's done. Murong Chang Feng only used a few minutes of time to put down the brush in his hand and hand it over to the teacher who was next to him. Please let the masters take a look. This is my answer. The teacher took the paper. He originally wanted to hand it over to Tu Laro, but Tu Laro lightly smiled and waved his hand, hinting him to hand it over to the master next to him. As expected of your disciple. In such a short time, he came up with 3 sets of plans. The master who took the paper shook his head with envy in his eyes. This is simply a sure win. Regarding this kind of result, Tu Laro wasn't surprised. The corners of his mouth curved up. He still knew this disciple's ability, and it was indeed not bad. Chapter 166. But how could he be so assured that his opponent wouldn't overtake him? Without waiting for the paper to be collected, He had the teacher hand it in first. Sigh, it was still those old words. Everything about this disciple of his was good, but his temperament was too impatient, too condescending. But it was also because Murong Chang Feng handed in his paper early that the audience below was like boiling water, their voices loud and dry. Lord Murong has won for sure, ha ha ha. Up until now, that woman hasn't even moved her brush. Only now did people notice that Hellion Vivian, who was standing to the side, really hadn't even moved her brush. Her fingers were only nimbly turning those armament components, her thin lips seemed to be smiling, and no one knew what she was thinking. The judge wrinkled his brows and faintly reminded. There isn't much time left in this competition. I hope that the contestants can hurry up a bit. If they haven't handed in their paper by the time, we'll determine that they've been eliminated. She probably finally knew how to be nervous. Hellion Vivian finally picked up the brush, but her long, shapely eyebrows were wrinkled into a ball. That appearance seemed to indicate that this question was very difficult. Huan Ming Xiong, who was standing not far away and watching the competition, let out a long sigh. This kind of question is indeed too difficult for a novice armament cultivator. Elder Huan also believes that this competition is won by the superior compound. The figure faintly smiled. This time, I reckon that the superior compound is truly displaying their original strength. However, the people from the inferior compound are also not bad. To be able to compare to the superior compound to this extent, losing a match can't be considered too shameful. There's still the last fifth of time left. The judge looked at the sandalwood that was about to burn out and broke out in cold sweat for Hellion Vivian. But looking at Hellion Vivian's appearance, it seemed that she was still struggling with her brush. The people below the stage were already laughing. What did I say? She'll definitely make a fool of herself. Someone who relies on currying favor with others to come participate in the armament competition. This is originally a joke. Sister Jiao, you should also stop her. Hellion Jiao gently smiled. How can I stop her? Eldest sister has always liked this kind of situation. She was implying that Hellion Vivian liked to be in the limelight. Naturally, the young misses of the officials also heard it. They all picked up their fans to cover the ridicule at the corners of their mouths. The little seventh prince stared at the southeast corner of his body and found that his third brother's eyes were deeper than ever. Could it be that he had some sort of backup plan? He seemed to have noticed the little one's gaze. Beligaju slowly raised his eyes. The little seventh prince paused for a moment and immediately sat up straight. His round canine teeth were exposed as he stared seriously at the spectator stand. Why did he feel that the woman's expression was very similar to the expression of the dean when he was giving him homework? He didn't like to write either, especially writing a long paragraph of words. Just thinking about it made him feel terrified. Could it be that the woman was so slow because she didn't know how to write? The seventh prince's bald little head fiercely wrinkled his little eyebrows. Then after the competition was over, he must properly get to know this woman. After all, it was simply too difficult to find someone in the academy whose handwriting was uglier than his. The last bit of incense fell to the ground. Pa. Hellion Vivian finally put down the brush in her hand before the incense burned out. Murong Chang Feng coldly glanced at her. Your luck is pretty good. He thought that she would definitely be eliminated. He didn't expect that she would actually catch up at the last moment. However, even if it was like this, she would only be a joke. He knew better than anyone how much weight she had. Last time in Armament City, she was merely a blind cat that ran into a dead mouse. This time, when he saw her write the test paper, he could clearly see that she was in a difficult situation. Maybe the answers that were handed in were all randomly made up by her. A person like her was indeed only worthy of that poor and pedantic brat. Only, Murong Chang Feng looked at the side of her face that seemed to be stained with light under the sun. His hands clenched and he unexpectedly couldn't control himself as he said, Hellion Vivian, I'll give you one last chance. If you turn back, this lord will take into account our past relationship and make you lose less miserably. Ha ha ha, woman, what did I hear? This man actually used this kind of method to make you turn back. Yuan Ming's voice came from the celestial boundary space. His gaze was evil. How about it? Do you want to become the Lord's wife that everyone looks up to? Hellion Vivian indifferently retracted her gaze and looked at Murong Changfeng. Her smiling face was light, as if she was replying to Yuan Ming's words, but also as if she was saying to Murong Changfeng, "This is simply the best joke I've ever heard." Murong Changfeng's back suddenly stiffened. His handsome side profile also became gloomy in that split second. The two people's voices were very small. The others didn't know what they were saying. They only saw them standing side by side. That kind of posture unexpectedly had a somewhat unclear lingering flavor. It can't be. Even now, that woman still can't forget Lord Murong. It's only a short time of waiting, yet she's rushing to talk to Lord Murong. She really has opened our eyes. A young girl who normally liked Murong Changfeng very much sneered. Her words clearly looked down on Hellion Vivian. The person sitting next to her was also from the superior compound. He lightly laughed. I reckon she feels that she's going to lose and is currently asking Lord Murong to comfort her. Lord Murong wouldn't comfort a good-for-nothing. The young girl blew on her red fingers. She clearly came here to make a fool of herself. In a moment, when the answer is announced, we'll just wait for her to lose face. Nangong Lai listened to those discussions. Nangong Lai pretended to let out a long sigh. His body casually leaned backwards, his two hands behind his head. His thin lips carried an evil aura. Intentionally or unintentionally, he looked towards Beligaju. Ari, unforgettable old feelings, unforgettable old feelings. Ah. It looks like I have to prepare to go on stage in a moment. Love can make a woman completely lose her ability to judge, so much so that she can't distinguish between friend and foe. Captain clearly intends to throw the game. Arju, what do you say? Beligaju was somewhat absent-minded. He slightly leaned his body. His deep eyes flashed with a strange vastness as he sank into contemplation. Suddenly, he crossed his hands and supported his chin. The corners of his mouth slowly pulled out an ice-cold smile. I said, "You better shut up." After saying this, he stood up. Arju, where are you going? Nangong Lai was excited. Was he going to duel? For the sake of stealing a woman or something? Beligaju glanced back. Even though he was draped in a long windbreaker, one could still feel his tall and straight back. His muscles were distinct and well built. That pure and resolute ancient aura was displayed on his body. That was the elegance accumulated over the years. He slowly curved his thin lips. His gaze on Hellion Vivian's body emitted a demonically cold light. Chapter 167. Beligaju lowered his eyes, his black hair falling down, making people unable to see his expression. Go get a birdcage. When did you become interested in raising birds? Nangong Lai oddly raised his eyebrows. Beligaju's voice was neither fast nor slow. It's not birds, it's people. Hearing this, Nangong Lai's scalp went numb. No, it can't be what I think it is. Arju flew into a rage out of humiliation, planning to lock up the eldest miss of the Hellion family and raise her. Listen to me, I was just joking. Nangong Lai immediately grabbed Nangong Ju's arm, his whole body itching to wrap around him, just to hold him back. Captain definitely won't be lenient, did you forget? What she loves the most is money. Who knows what rank that guy Murong Changfeng will be? Beligaju deeply looked at him. Just when Nangong Lai was about to be unable to hold on after being stared at by him, Beligaju finally sat back down, his eyes cold. You're right. Huh. Nangong Lai swallowed his saliva. In fact, he already forgot what he just said. Beligaju extended his hand, wanting to turn the ring on his finger, but discovered that there was a thin piece of white cloth tied there. His black eyes deepened. What she loves the most is money. Who knows what rank the others will be? Including him. Just as Nangong Lai and Beligaju were talking, Master Tu Laro on the stage had already started reading Murong Changfeng's test paper. It was written very well, and every reason was very sufficient. The results could be considered excellent. The other masters also thought so, nodding to each other. When it came to Hellion Vivian's test paper, one of the masters didn't even bother to turn it over. The result of the competition was already obvious. What was the difference between looking and not looking? But suddenly, Master Tu Lao actually grasped that roll of paper, his fingers trembling. So it's like this. So it turns out that ferrotungsten can also have this kind of effect, changing the shape of armaments. Why didn't I think of this before? He wouldn't have been so excited if the test paper was just a bunch of random answers. However, it was a logical thought process. Every part of the test paper was placed in a very suitable position by her. It was as if these parts were originally an armament, but after taking them apart, they were then reassembled. Furthermore, each new design was even more amazing than the previous one. What was most inconceivable was that she had actually written an entire page with no less than 8 sets of proposals. Even he could only think of 7 sets at most. This girl actually. What was even more shocking was that she even added a note at the end. There are other solutions, but this brush writing is too confusing. I suggest that the masters change to oral answers in the future. Thank you. There was another plan. How was that possible? The person sitting next to Master Tu Lao was also shocked. They looked at each other in dismay, their eyes trembling. Hellion Vivian. Master Tu Lao muttered this name, his fingers clenching. This person is definitely a genius. I want to go down and see what this girl looks like. The other master extended his left hand, blocking Master Tu Lao. No, Tu Lao, wait a moment. This is a competition after all. We must follow the competition rules. Besides, she is Jizun's disciple. Maybe she just happened to know the answer before, and memorized it word for word. Tu Lao was slightly stunned. That's true, Jizun, that guy can probably make 10 sets. However, to be able to memorize so many armaments parts, you won't be able to find a second one in White Academy. That girl is definitely not like what others say, a waste. I know this. The Grandmaster nodded his head and stroked his beard. What this old man means is that it's clear that she has won this round. However, as for how strong she is, we still need to see her actual operation, which is the second part of the armament assembly. Haha, your suggestion is good. Tu Lao sat down again, but his eyes were not as calm as before. Everyone looked puzzledly at the two masters who were laughing loudly, and frowned in confusion. It must be eldest sister's answer that made people not know whether to laugh or cry. That's why the great masters acted this way. As Hellion Jiawa spoke, she sighed rather vexedly. Sigh. When the young ladies heard this, they all laughed. What kind of answer do you think she will write? It shouldn't be something like I don't know, ha ha ha. Facing the ridicule from below the stage, Hellion Vivian did not open her mouth to say anything, only twirling the brush in her hand. Even her posture was as languid and clear as if she was taking a stroll in a garden. If it had to be described, then it would be the afternoon sun, beautiful mountains, and clear waters, paired with a cup of Earl black tea. Twirling the brush was very normal, but when you really drank it in your mouth, then you would know what a noble was. Hellion Vivian, she was this kind of person. That kind of carefreeness, as if everything in front of her was just a game. Speaking of which, to her, it was indeed so. Parts assembly, she had played with it since childhood. The modern-day K7's process was much more complicated than this. Cold weapon parts, to her, could be said to be a piece of cake. What's more, when she came to Dragon War Empire, she relied on parts assembly to become rich. Although she might not be able to compare to those masters in other areas, the biggest marketing feature of her shop was from ordinary martial artists to martial families. In other words, no matter what kind of armament parts, good or bad, she had come into contact with them all. Moreover, in her mind, there was no clear definition of good or bad. As long as a part was pressed into a suitable position, it could collide and produce unexpected power. Master Bai did not know what Hellion Vivian was thinking, and thought that she was speechless. Facing Tu Su Feng, who was sitting not far from him, he said with a very regretful appearance, "What did I say? Let the principal change the person to go on stage. It seems that the second part of the competition does not need to continue. This is destined to be an elimination round." Tu Su Feng did not respond, only turning his head, he said to Nangong Lai, "You prepare." When the people from the inferior compound heard this, they lowered their heads. Even the principal said this. It seemed that there was no hope. Lord, I knew it would be this kind of result. The young girl from the superior compound faced Murong Changfeng and smiled sweetly. You are our Dragon War Empire's most outstanding genius. It would be unreasonable if you don't win. Murong Changfeng knew who that young girl was, and because he knew, he smiled gently. After all, there was profit to be gained. The result is not out yet, let's wait on the side. Although he said this, Murong Changfeng's appearance was that he was determined to win. Okay. The young girl looked at Hellion Vivian complacently. Hellion Vivian did not even bother to throw her. That young girl clenched her teeth, waiting for the result to be announced, then she would properly ridicule her. Finally, Master Tu Laro, who was standing at the referee's table, stood up. His gaze surveyed the crowd below, his voice unhurriedly. The winner of the first part of the armament competition. Chapter 168. Murong Changfeng raised his chin, the side of his face looking incomparably arrogant, as if he'd already anticipated that he would win. He'd already taken a step forward, intending to accept everyone's worship. He didn't expect that Master Tu Laro would actually lower his voice and loudly read out the name Hellion Vivian. Snap! The thing in the figure's hand dropped. Even Huan Ming Xiong also didn't anticipate this kind of result. He stood there blankly, simply too late to make any sort of reaction. The smile at the corners of Murong Changfeng's mouth, in that split second, clearly stiffened in place. He was stunned as he widened his pair of long and narrow eyes. The footsteps he'd taken also stiffened in place. His fingers slightly trembled as he turned his head and faced Wei Wei to look at her. The blood on his face completely drained away. How could this be? How could he lose to a woman with no redeeming qualities? Everyone was stunned by this result. They opened their mouths, forgetting to close them. Right now, the field was so quiet that it was as if even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. No, it can't be. The one who won was that trash? That young girl who was still clamoring, and Hellion Jiao's expressions cracked at the same time. The ridicule that was originally going to come out of their mouths were all swallowed back into their throats. Their cheeks were green and white. It was a wonderful sight. In the midst of everyone's astonishment, Hellion Vivian, dressed in white and blue, slowly walked forward. Her expression didn't change at all. It was still that small face with a smile that wasn't a smile, but at this moment, it made people unable to move their eyes away. Her clothes were also very simple, without any matching. Her long sleeves floated in the air, her ink-black hair fluttered. The contrast between black and white actually brought out a peerless beauty. The spectators stared blankly at this scene. What kind of joke was this? A trash actually defeated Murong Changfeng. When did this woman become so awesome? Didn't she know nothing? Murong Changfeng simply couldn't accept this kind of result. He, the dignified Murong Changfeng, actually lost to a trash who hadn't even touched the slightest bit of armament before. Murong Changfeng calmed down the undulation in his chest and turned his head to face the judging panel not far away. Masters, I wrote 3 proposals, one more than what you requested. I really don't understand how I lost. Master Tu Laro heard the dissatisfaction in Murong Changfeng's tone. His white eyebrows slightly wrinkled, and soon after, he sighed. This disciple of his was still too proud and arrogant. It's true that you've written 3 proposals, and they're all very good. The great master sitting next to Tu Tian knew that it wasn't a good time for Tu Tian to open his mouth, so he simply took over Murong Changfeng's words. His voice carried a smile. Lord, you're already very formidable. However, your opponent has written twice as many proposals as you, and every proposal is more outstanding than yours. The implication of his words was that what else was there to be unconvinced about? Murong Changfeng's face shook, as if he couldn't believe it. Twice as many proposals as mine. Impossible, this is absolutely impossible. Those parts that master gave, at most, only 5 proposals can be made into an armament. 7 or 8 proposals, it's simply impossible. Hearing Murong Changfeng say that it's impossible, the light in the Hellion Jiao's eyes changed. She bit her red lips and said, "Great Master, is there some problem in this? Even if someone is Grandmaster Zizun's disciple, this kind of unforeseen event shouldn't occur. You're saying that this old man is covering up for Hellion Vivian?" That great master's face slightly sunk, and said in an unkind tone, "Since you feel that me being the judge is unfair, how about you be the judge?" When the Hellion Jiawa heard this, her face was embarrassed. "I didn't say that great master was covering up for anyone, I only felt that perhaps someone tampered. Otherwise, how could that slut possibly win?" Enough. At this time, Great Master Tu Laro, who hadn't spoken until now, coldly opened his mouth. "I didn't want to speak because I didn't want your superior compound to be too embarrassed. This result was set by me. If Miss Hellion still has objections, you can also cancel this old man's qualifications as a judge." As he spoke, he looked towards where Great Master Bai was sitting. His voice carried a strong displeasure. "So this is the superior compound student that Great Master Bai has always been so proud of. You really have broadened this old man's horizons. Hihi, if the superior compound students are all like this, then I suggest that the principal should cancel the superior compound as soon as possible." Great Master Bai stiffened. His appearance was as if he couldn't wait to find a hole in the ground and crawl into it. Tu Su Feng smiled gently and didn't reply. Great Master Tu Laro was really angry this time. It wasn't only the Hellion Jiawa. After everyone from the superior compound heard these words, they all felt as if they'd been slapped in the face. Everyone who was originally still doubting didn't dare to be doubtful at this moment. Great Master Tu Laro was the heirs master, and even he said that there weren't any problems with the competition. Then the one who won was really Hellion Vivian. Tu Laro didn't care about everyone's reaction. He extended his hand and handed the rolled-up paper to the teacher standing to the side. "Let him see for himself." The teacher lowered his head and handed the paper that belonged to Hellion Vivian into Murong Chang Feng's hand. Murong Chang Feng looked at those clear lines of thought, concise narration, but every word poked at the key points of the answers. His pupils swayed back and forth. He'd never thought that those parts could be used like this. Especially the sixth line that mentioned it. Not only him, perhaps even his master didn't know that the most worthless parts in their eyes would have such a big effect. She really wrote 7 or 8 sets of plans. In the distance, a figure's voice trembled. "Elder Huan, why didn't you say earlier that you knew such a martial genius?" Huan Mingxiong glared. "What do you want this old man to say?" This old man didn't know that this girl knew martial arts. This old man only knew that her attainments in martial qi were extraordinary. As for the rest, this old man only saw it today. He was also very gloomy. Okay. He'd stayed with that girl for more than 10 days, yet he still didn't know the details of that girl. Heavens, what kind of monsters did the inferior compound take in this year? The figure's mouth said monsters, yet his eyes shined as if he'd discovered a treasure. Huan Mingxiong stroked his chin and muttered to himself. No wonder that brat Tu Su wanted to take on the role of the inferior compound's principal this year. Since he's that one, then the student by his side who chose divination. Who could it be? "Elder Huan, what are you saying? Who's who?" The figure's thoughts were only on Hellion Vivian. Right now, he couldn't wait to see what she'd look like when she personally assembled the martial arts. Huan Mingxiong curved his lips into a smile, his eyes carrying a deep meaning. "Nothing. I said that what you said was correct. This year's inferior compound took in a bunch of monsters." Murong Chang Feng, who was standing on the stage, heard the sound of a gasp beside his ear. His body stiffened. Did he really lose? Lost to the girl he disdained the most? Chapter 169. Murong Chang Feng pinched the paper in his hand. When he looked at Hellion Vivian again, his eyes carried an unprecedented blankness. That kind of blankness made the young girl who adored him clench her fists in hatred. Her red nails dug into her palms. She glanced at Hellion Vivian and tried her best to maintain her disdain. "It's just that she wrote a lot of plans. If I were Grandmaster Zizun's disciple, maybe I could also write this many plans. Who doesn't know how to recite?" Whether or not you win depends on the actual assembly of armaments. Although what the young girl said wasn't wrong, the students sitting at the inferior compound really wanted to tell her, Hellion Vivian, that girl, really didn't recite. When she was in class, other than sleeping, she was lying on her stomach. She made the teachers so angry that they didn't expect her to wake up. Who can't recite? Look at how simple she makes it sound. If you have the ability, go up and compete with Boss. I guarantee that you won't even be able to recognize all of the armaments. Those people from the good compound already truly regarded Hellion Vivian as their boss. It wasn't only because of this match. As early as in the previous match between the good compound and the inferior compound, they were already shocked by Hellion Vivian's indescribably fast speed. What's more, only those who had come into contact with armaments knew that memorizing so many parts in such a short amount of time and immediately remembering where they should be placed wasn't as simple as it sounded. In their opinion, these proud sons of heaven from the superior compound couldn't even compare to them. At the very least, when they lost, they admitted defeat. These people from the superior compound only knew how to continuously find excuses for themselves. Wait until Boss really makes a move, then they'll be honest. This was the first time that the young girl was looked at with this kind of gaze by the people from the good compound. Putting aside her family background, she was someone who entered the superior compound as soon as she entered the school. Every time she walked out, she was envied by others. Now, these people from the good compound had some guts, daring to talk back to her. Then let's look at the actual assembly of armaments. Just as the anger was about to reach a state of mutual hostility, a faint smile came from the center of the field. Hellion Vivian curled her lips into a half-smile, but that smile did not reach her eyes. She slowly walked over, looking more languid and handsome than the average woman. Then, she turned her face to the side and moved her slender fingers. With a click, she seemed to have undone something on her right wrist and lazily threw it to the side. Her posture was very calm, and there was an indescribable evil charm in her elegance. Just like the evaluation people gave her in modern times, Hellion Wei Wei was definitely the ace of aces. She had a neutral beauty that made people jealous. Not only could she be as warm as the clear sun, but she could also be as handsome as a queen in a painting. Everyone was stunned as they looked at the heavy buckle that she had casually thrown to the side. All of them sucked in a deep breath. Had she been wearing a weighted buckle all along? Wasn't it said that only the students of the superior compound wouldn't be unable to lift their hands due to the weight? If one's cultivation hadn't reached a certain level, it would be impossible to withstand the gravitational pull of the heavy buckle, right? But this woman had actually been wearing it all along, winning from the good compound to the superior compound. Moreover, the difference between her and Murong Chung Feng was that she would appear in every match. How did she do it in the end? Even the fine compound's competitor was somewhat inconceivable. In the end, he couldn't help but turn his head and look at Hazy E. I really did suffer a crushing defeat. At that time, I shouldn't have been unconvinced. Alright, boy, losing to her isn't anything shameful. Hazy E punched that person's shoulder and silently thought. Wait until you find out that she's the boss of the profound heavens that you worship the most, then you'll feel even more ashamed. How could that young girl know this? She only saw Hellion Vivian's indifferent appearance and found her increasingly unpleasing to the eye. She clenched her hands, wishing that she could rush up and tear Hellion Vivian apart. Hellion Jiaowa looked at her, leaned over next to her ear and said a few words. That young girl's eyes lit up and she slightly lifted her chin. Since Miss Hellion is so confident, why don't you make all of those plans that you've written? That way, we can see whether you really know how to do it, or if you've only memorized the information that Grandmaster Zizun gave you. Cramming and what not can't prove anything at all. The competition's time was limited. Even if this slut could assemble armaments, she couldn't possibly make 7 or 8 armaments in the remaining time of half a stick of incense. Moreover, she had to use the same parts. What's more, these parts weren't made of very good tungsten iron. Some of them simply couldn't be used. She actually wanted to see what this slut would do. It's fine if you want me to make all of them. Hellion Vivian smiled. Her eyes swept over Tu Su Feng below the stage. However, according to the previous competition rules, I simply didn't need to make so many armaments. Now that the superior compounds people have raised an additional request, then shouldn't the prize money after the competition also be doubled? The young girl sneered. Prize money? You should first win before we talk about it. I've never done anything that doesn't get paid. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. In the next second, her expression became incomparably fierce. Otherwise, why should I listen to your request? Do you really think that the whole world is your mother, and that you can do whatever you want? The young girl was blocked by Hellion Vivian's words until her entire body started to tremble. She firmly clenched her own hands. Hellion Vivian, don't you just want money? As long as you can truly make all of these armaments, I'll pay. Good. Hellion Vivian gave the final word. The corners of her mouth carried a smile. Then it settled. Nangong Lai looked at this scene and let out a long sigh. Captain Weiwei definitely did it on purpose. Arju, no wonder she became that Hongwon of yours. The degree of her black-bellied is practically on par with yours. How could she win against someone and still make them pay? Sinister, too sinister. Beligaju didn't speak. His slender legs were slightly crossed. His left hand, wrapped in a white cloth, lazily supported his lower jaw. His pitch-black eyes were like the midnight, beautiful and inconceivably playful. Nangong Lai snorted. He knew that the more black-hearted a person was, the more they could arouse Arju's interest. It seemed that their great Captain Hellion wouldn't be able to escape the misfortune of being locked up in a golden cage in the future. It couldn't be helped. Arju was just that wicked. In the past, that group of ministers were still guessing what kind of woman the royal family, who had never been close to women, would like. In the end, they confirmed that their target was someone like Hellion Jiawa. She looked innocent and unaffected, gentle, a jasper who was untainted by the dust of the world. At that time, he wanted to tell them that Arju's taste was much heavier than what they had imagined. It was just that this man had a misophobia that couldn't stand any woman. If he really had to choose, Arju reckoned that he would like the kind of woman who would reach out her claws at him. Chapter 170. It wasn't because this type of girl was relatively rare, but rather because this man liked to break off the claws of his prey. Nangong Lai was suspicious. What would he do if he really did that kind of thing in the future? He reckoned that there would only be two situations. One was that he found the person dirty and kicked the person out halfway through. The other was that he would first remove that person's claws if he found them pleasing to the eye. Whether or not he did it wasn't the main point. Thinking like this, Nangong Lai always felt that Captain Hallion's future was really incomparably worrying. The three grandmasters sitting on the judging panel were also worried for Wei Wei. After all, with so many plans, even they wouldn't be able to make all of them within the time it takes to burn half a stick of incense, not to mention Wei Wei, who hadn't obtained any qualifications as an armament master. They always felt that this competition was more or less bullying. If Ji Zun came back and knew that they treated his disciple like this, he would definitely flip out on the spot. Tu Tian and Yun Xiu glanced at each other. Master Yun Xiu stepped forward to persuade Hellion Vivian. Girl, just like you said, the Academy's competition rules don't require you to make so many armaments. You can completely ignore what other people say. Thank you, Master. Hellion Vivian knew that these old people were sincerely thinking for her, and the smile on her face became more sincere. However, this student has already decided to accept Miss Mu's proposal. Hearing her call herself a student, Yun Xiu changed his previous impression of her and deeply sighed. It's still Ji Zun, that guy, who has a pair of good eyes. Accepting such a sensible disciple was because they had previously listened too much to the rumors. Alas. Thinking of this, Yun Xiu smiled and continued, Girl, do it well. This old man believes that you can succeed. As a master of the armament assembly, and as well as having inextricable relations with young Master Wu Shuang, Master Yun unexpectedly spoke to Hellion Vivian like this. This made the young girl surnamed Mu even more jealous. She coldly glared at Wei Wei. She actually wanted to see how this slut would assemble a large pile of useless parts. She's just a dead duck who refuses to admit her mistake. Unexpectedly, there's actually someone who believes her. Master Tu Laro stroked his shining white long beard. His voice was neither mild nor mild. Chang Feng, since Miss Helion has agreed, then you should also follow what you wrote before and make all the armaments you want to make. Otherwise, this competition would be too unfair. He didn't say the last sentence out loud. Firstly, it was because he really didn't want to see his beloved disciple lose face like this. Secondly, since Wei Wei herself had already agreed, he also wouldn't say anything more. Perhaps, in his heart, he also wanted to know whether the plans that Helion Wei Wei had written on the paper would be effective in the end. Similarly, as an armament master, he couldn't be more clear. Sometimes, thinking about it was one thing, but when the parts were actually put together in one's hands, it was another thing altogether. The two people didn't have much time. They both had half an incense stick's worth of time, but Murong Chang Feng only needed to make 3 armaments, while Helion Vivian needed to make at least 7. However, the people from the superior compound still didn't feel that they'd taken advantage of her. As before, they mocked and ridiculed. Do you guys think that trash can really assemble all these parts together? She's just bragging. If she said she could make one, I'd believe her. 7, and only half an incense stick's worth of time. Even if she wanted to be in the limelight, she wouldn't play around like that. She only wrote it correctly, yet she doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. She really is a country bumpkin from the inferior compound who hasn't seen the world at all. She's the same as her mother. The student from the superior compound hadn't even finished speaking when he saw a shadow cover his eyes. Helion Vivian lowered her eyes to look at her. Her peripheral vision carried an unprecedented chill. I've changed my mind. I don't want the money, but there's one thing, this person. She pointed at the young girl who'd mentioned her mother. The corners of her mouth carried a bloodthirsty smile. I want her to slap herself 10 times. That young girl suddenly stood up. Helion Vivian, who do you think you are? You're nothing but a trash. This is White Academy. Don't use your city's arrogant and hedonistic behavior here. Helion Vivian curved her lips into a smile. She suddenly leaned over and grabbed that young girl's collar. Her voice carried a roguish tone. Ian? I'm an arrogant and hedonistic hedonist. Otherwise, you guys also wouldn't have raised that request. The competition will continue as usual. As she spoke, she faced Master Bai and looked over. Only, when the time comes, your superior compound will definitely lose miserably. If you don't believe me, you can compare. Master Bai clenched both of his hands. As a master of the superior compound, his pressure was even greater than that of the students. For so many years, the superior compound had always been completely superior to every other compound. Not to mention the Dragon War Empire, even in the entire Divine Continents academies, they occupied an extremely important position. But this kind of superior victory was unexpectedly going to end here with him. He simply couldn't imagine, if the superior compound really lost this competition, would he still be able to sit in this position that he'd just promoted? The superior compound had to win, no matter what kind of price they had to pay. Not only Master Bai, even the other students of the superior compound also thought this way. That's why after Helion Vivian spoke those words, they all simultaneously looked towards that young girl. This was the so-called top students. In the face of victory or defeat, they'd display their unprecedented selfishness, only for the sake of winning. Helion Vivian knew this group of people's characteristics, which was why she'd temporarily change her request. Because what that young girl said just now already touched her bottom line. Her bottom line was very simple. She didn't care if they scolded her, but if they humiliated her family, she didn't mind letting these people know how ruthless her methods were. The young girl looked at that pair of eyes that seemed to be sealed by ice, and subconsciously shrunk her shoulders. How did this woman suddenly become so difficult to deal with, hateful? She originally wanted to ridicule her with a few words, but didn't expect that she'd be forced into a dilemma by this woman. If she didn't agree, when the time came for the superior compound to really lose, she'd become the main culprit. She certainly didn't want to be ostracized by the people of the superior compound in the future. She'd seen the people of the superior compound ostracize others, probably because of their background. They'd never acted like a shrew, grabbing someone's hair when they didn't see eye to eye. They'd only indifferently walk away when you wanted to blend in with them and chat with them. So much so that after they saw you, they disdainfully curled their thin lips. She absolutely didn't want to be treated like that. The young girl clenched her teeth, raised her head and said, "Isn't it just a few slaps? If you really win, this young lady will accompany you to the end." This good-for-nothing was only bluffing. She didn't believe that she could make 7 armaments in such a short time, unless she grew 3 heads and 6 arms. Chapter 171. Not to mention that she didn't believe it, even Murong Chang-fong held a skeptical attitude towards all of this. However, Hellion Vivian didn't shrink back at all after hearing what she said. She simply let go of her collar and smiled faintly. "Since the conditions have been agreed upon, then let's begin." As she spoke, she tied up her long hair and picked up the armament component in front of her. At this moment, her expression was especially serious. Her pair of eyes that were like the night sky were as tranquil as the ocean. It was as if as long as she stood there and slightly smiled, a cool breeze would come. Since the matter had already reached this stage, the teacher announced loudly, "The second part of the armament competition begins now. Will the 3 referees please light the incense?" Pa. As soon as his voice fell, Hellion Vivian moved her hands. Her speed was so fast that everyone didn't have time to react. Even their eyes didn't have any misgivings about this side's movement. Hellion Vivian had already started. This was the first time that she personally assembled an armament in front of all the students. She turned her face to the side, her thick eyelashes slightly drooping down. Her slender and fair fingers didn't seem to be assembling armaments, but rather like a musician playing the piano. Every finger was fully utilized by her to the appropriate position, beautifully and nimbly changing them. The components in her hand also followed her movements, presenting a smooth and flowing line. Apart from the ka sound, everyone simply couldn't see clearly how her fingers moved. The only thing that could be felt was that this scene was dazzlingly beautiful, that kind of natural and unforced movement, as if those armament components were merely toys that she casually picked up. First, when Murong Chang-fong had just started assembling, Hellion Vivian's side had already used the first set of plans to assemble those components into an armament. Her thin lips faintly curved. Under the contrast of her white clothes, she actually looked somewhat irresistible. Pa. The second armament. Hellion Vivian's palm turned over and a silver whip took shape. Murong Chang-fong was the closest to Hellion Vivian, so he was the clearest about how those originally scattered components turned into armaments in her hands. His eyes flickered uncontrollably, and the components in his hand all fell to the ground with a crash. If it was said that when Beligaju won before, the scene was deathly silent. But now, these people couldn't take their eyes off it. Following the rhythmic sound, they couldn't help but swallow their saliva. "Isn't this too fast? How could he be so fast?" Only Master Tu Laro, at the same time as he was amazed, he also carried a trace of regret. This Hellion Vivian was fast, but she was not as fast as the girl he had met at the Phoenix Pavilion. He thought that someone who could come up with so many proposals would be better than that girl. But now, it seemed that it was not possible. Sigh, Pa. The third armament. Logically speaking, the assembly of armaments would become more and more difficult the further one progressed. After all, the plan was also like this, from simple to difficult. However, this didn't seem to have any effect on Hellion Vivian. On the contrary, it made her pair of eyes look increasingly bright like water, resplendent like the stars. Murong Chang-fong looked at the other's exquisite facial features. His heart unexpectedly felt as if it had been ruthlessly plucked by something, sour and numb. Lord. The young girl outside the field looked at this scene and firmly bit her thin lips. "Hurry up and pick up your things. Lord had never used this kind of gaze to look at anyone before. That kind of expression, as if he was seduced by the other party, simply deserved to die. Murong Chang-fong finally returned to his senses. He bent down and picked up those components. He quickly made the first armament, but he was unable to concentrate his energy. Everyone was stunned. Pa. The fourth armament. Hellion Vivian casually fiddled with her own neck and continued to bury her head. Hooah! The crowd instantly went into an uproar. The fourth one, she really already made 4. It can't be, Lord just finished one. What about time? The most important thing is time. In a flash, everyone's gaze fell on that half-incense stick that was about to burn out. A nervousness they had never felt before engulfed their entire bodies. The sandalwood incense was about to burn out. The young girl clenched her fists tightly. That pair of eyes stared unwaveringly at the half-incense stick in the distance. That kind of look in her eyes was as if she couldn't wait for the wind to blow a bit stronger and quickly let that incense burn out. Hellion Jiaoer sat right next to her. Her left hand covered the back of Hellion Jiaoer's hand, her voice brewing malice. Don't worry, that woman won't be able to win. It's only 4 armaments, yet she already used up about 4/5 of the time. She simply won't be able to finish the remaining 3 armament. Just as Hellion Jiaoer said this, a pa sound rang out. The 5th armament was single-handedly placed on the table by Hellion Vivian. Her gaze looked up, as if she was also looking at the length of the sandalwood incense stick. There's still 2 left. There's still 2 left, and she'll win. There's already no time, look at that incense stick. Everyone knew that young Master Wu Shuang was the fastest person to make armaments. How much ability did this Hellion Vivian have? She couldn't possibly be faster than young Master Wu Shuang, right? What's more, there wasn't enough time. If she reluctantly assembled these armaments together, and didn't follow the plan she had previously proposed, then she would still lose. But what the crowd didn't expect was that in the next second, Hellion Vivian actually raised her hand and removed something from her wrist. It was the gravity buckle that they had seen before. What kind of joke was this? How many gravity buckles did she actually have on her hand? Pa. Someone noticed that Hellion Vivian switched hands. Look, she's starting to use her left hand as the main one, and her right hand as the support. Her speed seems to have doubled from before. Could it be that she simply didn't use her full strength before? This is too frightening. It was indeed frightening. As a White Academy's great master, Yun Xiu didn't have the confidence that he could do this. Although this was only a beginner's armament assembly, and didn't use any hard to fiddle with 0 years, even him making 4 was already his limit. He'd always thought that Murong Chang Feng was a genius. Apart from the armament assembly's young master Wu Shuang, there wasn't anyone who could surpass him in armament attainments. After all, at such a young age, there really weren't many juniors who could catch up to him. But, when he saw today's competition and saw Hellion Vivian's assembly technique, he finally understood what was called a genius among geniuses. How could there be such a powerful girl, and this girl was actually always treated by them as a good-for-nothing waste? The 7th one, she's making the 7th one. Inexplicably, silence appeared in the venue. Ever since Hellion Vivian finished displaying the 6th armament, everyone couldn't help but hold their breaths. Great Master Bai couldn't sit still any longer. With a sudden sound, he stood up from the wooden chair. His eyes looked towards that half-incense stick's worth of time, and the corners of his mouth slowly hooked up into a smile. She won't win, because there's already no time. Great Master Bai hadn't finished speaking the word time when a clear pa sound resounded throughout the entire venue. Like the sound of Sanskrit, it didn't recede for a long time. Chapter 172. Wei Wei's fair hand placed the last armaments on the table. Master Bai looked at this scene in disbelief, even his figure seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. However, at this time, the allotted sandalwood incense had just finished burning. The incomparably arrogant young girl's face suddenly turned deathly white, forcibly retreating a large step, almost falling onto her seat, as if her soul had been sucked out of her body. That waste actually made all of them. How could it be like this? Lost. The heir actually really lost. Furthermore, this was under the premise that the opponent had to make 7 armaments. The young girl recalled the promise she had made before, and unexpectedly had a kind of unspeakable regret. Hellion Vivian didn't look at her, and according to the competition rules, placed all 7 armaments on a tray, letting the teacher take them over, and let the judges appraise them. Yun Xiu restrained the nervousness in his heart, and lightly picked up the first armament. Just as he was about to look, he saw Tu Tian, who was sitting beside him, suddenly stand up, his face carrying an indescribable excitement. That young girl couldn't see Master Tu Tian's expression clearly, and thought that there was still a way to turn things around. She lifted her eyes and said, "Master Tu Tian, is there something wrong?" Hearing this, everyone was sluggish. In such a short amount of time, making 7 armaments in one go, it was indeed impossible to avoid making mistakes. Could it be that there really was something wrong? The students of the good compound all looked towards Master Tu Tian. What they didn't expect was that the old man unexpectedly seemed to have discovered some rare treasure, his voice carrying excitement. "Soaring flames, this armament is actually soaring flame." Soaring flames? After hearing these 4 words, Yun Xiu suddenly turned his head, and snatched the armament from Tu Tian's hand. His eyes also started to sway. "It really is soaring flame. How is this possible? We obviously only provided ordinary parts. How could it reach such a high attack power?" "Hey, Yun Xiu, what are you snatching for? This old man still hasn't finished looking." Tu Tian unhappily pushed away his good friend, and touched the outline of that armament again. "It's the mechanical position." She changed the original mechanical position of this part. At this point, Tu Laro realized that the treasure in his hand had been snatched away, and he immediately became furious. Everyone looked on blankly as the 2 masters, who had always been calm and steady, unexpectedly, for the sake of an armament, fought over it. Immediately, they looked at Wei Wei, who was standing on the stage, with some disbelief. What kind of armament did she actually make? Flames soaring to the heavens. Tu Sufeng's voice slowly rang out from the corner of the arena, giving people a kind of tireless gentleness. Attack power 100%, defense power 100%, able to gather the martial qi in a martial artist's body at one point, transforming into wind, resisting fire. What? 200 martial cultivators? What this woman made was a double 100 armament. Listening to Tu Sufeng's explanation, everyone felt somewhat dizzy and confused. For a moment, they actually felt that this wasn't some inter-school competition at all, but rather a national armament competition. Although they didn't have a special understanding of martial cultivation, they were still martial artists. Although they weren't familiar with the scientific names of martial cultivation, they clearly knew what offensive and defensive power were. Whether or not an armament was good or not, these 2 points were the most important. Right now, this flame-soaring sky that Hellion Vivian made, not only was its offensive and defensive power extraordinarily high, it could even resist fire in battle. This was simply comparable to the armaments that young Master Wu Shuang made. Hellion Vivian, was she really still that trash? Involuntarily, everyone's eyes trembled as they looked towards the young girl standing on the stage. She was only 15 years old, and hadn't received any professional training in martial cultivation. She couldn't even ignite a crystal ball, yet her attainments in martial cultivation surpassed young Master Murong. If she also possessed martial qi, how terrifying would that be? Everyone didn't even dare to think about it. Hellion Vivian's reputation as trash was thoroughly broken on this day. However, no one would have guessed that not long after, she would appear in front of everyone with a different appearance. At that time, people would know what was called a true genius queen. The result of the competition is already very clear. Great Master Yun Xiu smiled as he stood up. That smile on his face was enough to see how happy he was. With one hand behind his back, he waved towards Hellion Vivian with the other. "The winner, please come to the stage." Hellion Vivian smiled faintly as she walked forward, but heard a clang. Great Master Tu Laro, who was originally standing to the side, instantly dropped the teacup in his hand and shattered into pieces. "Girl, why are you here?" Tu Laro's presbyopic eyes opened wide, and even his voice became abnormal. Your name is Hellion Vivian?" "En." Hellion Vivian nodded her head, and casually spoke with the courtesy of an old man. "Elder Tu, long time no see." Tu Laro took a step forward, as if he wanted to hold Hellion Vivian's hand. Unexpectedly, he spoke somewhat incoherently. You don't know how long this old man has been searching for you in the capital after we parted at the Phoenix Pavilion. I've turned the entire city upside down, but still couldn't find your shadow. The 9-tune silver snake you made last time was simply too amazing. Can you make another one for this old man? This old man still has a lot of parts here. You can use them as you please, use them as you please, use them as you please. Yun Xiu looked at his good friend in astonishment. One must know that although Tu Laro's armament parts couldn't compare to their armament guilds, they were still very rare in the Dragon War Empire. A person who viewed armament parts as his life actually let this girl use his things as she pleased. Moreover, from Tu Laro's words, he seemed to have seen this girl somewhere before. Wait a minute. That 9-tunes silver snake was made by her? Yun Xiu also shouted loudly. Tu Laro nodded his head again, and laughed loudly, very cheerfully. Everyone was somewhat at a loss. Why did it seem like these two grandmasters had previously seen Hellion Vivian's prowess? Only the figure of Murong Changfeng, who was still in the arena, shook fiercely. He looked at Wei Wei with an unprecedented shock in his eyes. He didn't expect that the genius among geniuses that his master couldn't forget was actually her. Ah, I remember now. In the good courtyard, there was suddenly a student from the armament department who knocked his own head, with an appearance of sudden realization. At that time, Boss also participated in that armament competition at the Phoenix Pavilion. At that time, she also just went in and came out. We thought that she didn't know anything and was driven out by Grandmaster Tu Laro. Looking at it now, it wasn't that Boss didn't know anything, it was clearly that her speed was too fast, that's why she could come out so quickly. No wonder until now, we still haven't found the champion of that competition who left after receiving the silver. As it turns out, Boss never told anyone that the winner was her. Chapter 173. Silence. A silence that had never existed before. As if their breathing had been stifled, everyone was unable to utter a single word. As it turned out, this woman didn't rely on currying favor with Grandmaster Zizun to get her position. She really had already learned martial cultivation a long time ago. And Grandmaster Zizun definitely knew about this place, that's why he accepted her as his disciple. Hellion Jiaoer knew that Hellion Vivian went to participate in that martial cultivation test at the Phoenix building. Not only did she know, she even met that slut on the streets. But she never would have thought that the person that made Grandmaster Tu Laro flip the entire Beijing city upside down to find was actually her. Hellion Jiaoer's face turned green, her fingers continuously clenched. Damn it. Since when did this bitch become so powerful? Why didn't she notice it at all? Grandmaster Tu Laro didn't care what other people thought, his eyes shining as he waited for Hellion Vivian's answer. How is it? Girl. Let's wait for the competition to end first. Tu Laro's eyes landed on Hellion Vivian's body, while Hellion Vivian's eyes landed on the pile of shiny silver. Our inferior compounds people are all poor, we're still waiting to use money. Poor. After Hazy heard this word, he almost spat out the tea he drank. According to what he knew, their shop's daily turnover was already more than 100,000 taels of silver. How could Hellion Vivian, the big boss, not know? Cough cough, you're right, this old man was too excited, and actually forgot about this matter. Tu Laro lightly laughed as he raised his head. According to the school's rule of 2 out of 3, this old man announces that in the competition between the superior compound and the inferior compound win. Peng. Grandmaster Bai finally couldn't hold on any longer, his entire person sitting back on the wooden chair. His previous complacent appearance was nowhere to be found, he reached out to cover his face, watching Tu Su Feng lead the inferior compound students towards the stage. He was still as refined as jade, his appearance as if he was in control of the universe. Yuan Ling Xian, whose 5 viscera and 6 bowels still hadn't recovered from the beating, watched this scene with bloodshot eyes, his teeth creaking as he gnashed them. He simply couldn't accept that they were actually defeated in seconds by someone from the inferior compound. So much so that they lost all face. I'm not convinced. Yuan Ling Xian stood up. When he looked at Beligaju, he wished he could tear him to shreds on the spot. I was merely shaken off the stage. If this wooden stage was large enough, I wouldn't necessarily have lost. Belagaju didn't even stop his footsteps. The indifferent look on his face clearly said, I don't care if you submit or not. Instead, it was Nangong Lai who sighed sinisterly at the side. Brother, look at the trouble you've caused. I thought you would beat young Master Yuan to the point where he wouldn't even be able to get up. Why did you show mercy? Belagaju glanced back, his expression indifferent. Young Master Yuan? Huh. Nangong Lai shrugged. Belagaju raised his eyebrows. Who's that? Yuan Ling Xian. I just finished competing with you, and you've already forgotten about me. Nangong Lai held back his laughter and pointed at Yuan Ling Xian, whose expression was extremely tangled. Belagaju made a no sound, his lips curling into a smile that wasn't a smile. Don't you think that for a person like him, rather than killing him, it would be better to let him live? That way, he'll always remember what it feels like to lose, making him feel even more uncomfortable. Was he saying that from beginning to end, he was letting him win? Yuan Ling Xian was thoroughly enraged. He wanted to rush onto the stage, but was stopped by the students on the side. Young Master Yuan, calm down a bit. If you cause a ruckus at this time, it'll be considered a violation of the Academy's rules. The Dean will punish you. Yuan Ling Xian was so angry that his face was distorted. He gasped for air in large mouthfuls, as if he was doing his best to suppress the anger in his chest. Hellion Vivian looked at his face and immediately felt that his deskmate's words weren't wrong. This kind of person letting him win a round was even more unacceptable than killing him. However, it was obviously already over. His deskmate still wanted to say the truth. This person really is sinister, too sinister. Hellion Vivian glanced sideways at Belagaju's perfect and flawless face, her gaze carrying a trace of inquiry. Belagaju naturally sensed her gaze. When he looked back, the corners of his mouth were already raised into a light smile that could merge with all things in the world, clean like an angel's. What's wrong? Nothing. Maybe she was thinking too much. Hellion Vivian faintly smiled. Let's receive the award. After receiving the award, we'll go drink a big round. Belagaju responded with a good. His eyebrows were like ink as they quietly spread to his line of sight. The corners of his lips curved in a deep and unfathomable smile floated with faint traces of light and shadow. Drink. That's right. If you drink too much, you can seize the opportunity to do something. The competition within the Academy finally came to an end. This was the first time in the 100-year history that the inferior compound had won the championship. As for the superior compound, even if they were unwilling, they could only rank second. The matter of Hellion Jiawa and Murong Chang Feng entering the battle spirit forces was thus dropped. There was no more room for discussion. Hellion Vivian took the award and walked off the stage. Her gaze indifferently swept over the young girl who wanted to escape. Miss Mu, it seems like there's something you forgot to do. That young girl's shoulders suddenly stiffened. She slowly turned her head and looked at everyone's gazes. She had no choice but to raise her arm. Slap. The sound of a slap was incomparably crisp. Hellion Jiawa's gaze turned. She extended her hand and pitifully pulled on Hellion Vivian's long sleeve. Big sister, she only spoke out of turn. It's not a big crime. Why do you have to make it so difficult for her? It's not a big crime. Hellion Vivian laughed very, very hard. Then is it that right now, when I insult your mother, Madame Su, you also feel that it's not a big crime? Hellion Jiawa choked until her fingers stopped. Hellion Vivian's expression was indifferent. Hellion Jiawa, go back and tell that good mother of yours. All of this is only the beginning. That's right. The enmity of killing her mother, the pain of seizing her family. She still hadn't reported it. Now, what was she doing? It was only the first step. You. Hellion Jiawa tightly clenched her hands, but couldn't say a single word of rebuttal. Because some family matters were only known to themselves, it wasn't suitable to be spread out in the open. Hellion Vivian didn't care about her reaction. She unhurriedly straightened her sleeves. Looking at that young girl's slightly red cheeks, she smiled faintly. Miss Mu, remember, I, Hellion Vivian, have always been one who doesn't offend people if they don't offend me. If they offend me, I'll cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. Moreover, that year, if it wasn't for Taisha Mu's memorial, her mother wouldn't have died with blood in her mouth. Don't think that because she was young, she didn't remember anything. On the contrary, the younger she was, the more she remembered how these people treated her and her mother. It was still that old saying, all of this was only the beginning. Next, she would take back what was originally hers, little by little. Chapter 174. That wretched slut. As soon as she returned to her room, the Hellion Jiawa swept all the decorations on the wooden table to the floor. The servant girl knelt on the floor, not daring to get up. The Hellion Jiawa clenched her fists, her sharp fingertips sinking into the white handkerchief in her palm. Her eyes showed unprecedented malice. According to the Academy's custom, every year, 2 of the best students from 2 courtyards will accompany the retired emperor to the hidden spirit temple to burn incense and pray for blessings. Go back and tell Mother, let Mother think of a way to free herself and go with the retired emperor. I want to see if that little slut can continue to be so arrogant when Mother comes. The servant girl hurriedly bowed her head, hurriedly answered yes, and retreated. But the Hellion Jiawa's eyes showed unprecedented malice, as if they were covered in arsenic, and a storm was coming. She must thoroughly remove that little slut before the 3rd prince chooses the princess consort. She must not let His Highness discover her martial talent. Night. The restaurant in the Commerce Courtyard was very lively. A group of people were gathered here, celebrating today's victory. Hellion Vivian originally only planned to drink a little, but after she accepted a group of younger brothers, everyone came to toast her. Hellion Vivian has never been the kind of person to be restrained by trifles. Moreover, in the modern era, after she and her brothers completed a mission, they would always randomly find a place to drink black beer on the streets of Germany and party all night long. So in reality, Hellion Vivian's alcohol tolerance was not bad. However, she misjudged the after-effects of the ancient white wine. Boss, come, let me toast you again. A very heroic youth raised a cup with one hand and scratched the back of his head with the other. I misunderstood boss before, please forgive me. Hellion Vivian let go of the hand that was supporting her forehead. There was not the slightest trace of drunkenness on her face. She reached out and touched the youth's cup, then raised her head and drank the rest of the fine wine. In any case, today was a happy day, so she could drink as much as she wanted. This was the first time since Hellion Vivian came to this strange world that she felt the passion of the modern world had returned. In fact, when she first arrived at the Dragon War Empire, she didn't want to look so indifferent on the surface. When she was in the modern era, she didn't taste what kinship was. She didn't expect that it would be even more thorough in ancient times. It was precisely because of this that the memories imprinted in this body made her so worried. Her grandfather, her mother. If it weren't for those people, she would have been able to have these things that she had always dreamed of. She was not the real Hellion Vivian, but she had the same experience as Hellion Vivian. In modern times, her father was just like her scumbag father. He only knew how to use women to climb up the social ladder. Once he had climbed to the top, he would kick the women aside. But her mother wasn't that strong. After learning of her father's betrayal, she suffered from depression. Every day, she lived in pain. At that time, she was still young. Her father brought a woman who was almost a generation younger than him to the house. She could only watch, unable to do anything. She knew that feeling was very painful. Her mother was afraid that the depression would hurt her, so she simply locked herself in the room. Every day, she stood under the railing on the 2nd floor, tiptoeing to see her mother. But she was pulled to the side by that woman and ruthlessly slapped a few times. That woman ran to her father and said that she was a lunatic like her mother. Her father didn't distinguish between right and wrong and directly sent her to boarding school. Other than a pitiful amount of living expenses, he didn't give her anything more. At that time, Hellion Vivian understood what hatred was. She used all her time to study, trying to change all of this. She remembered very clearly that when she was in elementary school, her classmates organized a summer camp. She was the only one left among the teachers. The conditions were not very good at a rural elementary school in the United States. Above her head, an old electric fan rotated and hummed a melody. And what she wanted to thank was that at that moment, she met someone who could change her fate. The successor of the Tang sect, young Master Tang. Young Master Tang also suffered from depression. The kind of depression that could be seen through at a glance. He never spoke to others, but he was a top genius. Who would have thought that an 8-year-old child could actually use a computer to hack the system that the United States was most proud of? However, this child was a Chinese, a true Chinese. Hellion Vivian seemed to have found a group in an instant. She also wanted to become such a person because only by becoming stronger could she protect the people she wanted to protect. At a young age, she made a decision. She followed young Master Tang to Chinatown and found old Master Tang. She fearlessly said that she wanted to join the Tang sect. Old Master Tang was still hesitating. After all, her identity was special. However, young Master Tang didn't even raise his head and said, "Okay." From then on, she became one of the 18 shadows of the Tang sect. She was the ace of the aces and never failed. And the first thing she did when she became an adult was to buy all the shares of her father's company and go home to pick up her mother. Unfortunately, no one could wait for her for 8 years. Her mother was long gone, all because of her treacherous father and that venomous mistress. They were afraid of public condemnation, so they never let her mother out and even wanted to send her away. Therefore, she hated her scumbag father and Mrs. Sue more than Hellion Vivian herself. The rain fell. Hellion Vivian also fell into a light sleep as she reminisced. Probably because she drank too much, the emotions that were originally well hidden surged out in an instant. Vaguely, Hellion Vivian felt something push aside the hair in front of her forehead. She frowned and turned her head to the other side. She heard a sigh beside her ear. Hellion Vivian wanted to open her eyes, but she was pulled deeper by the alcohol. Finally, someone helped her up. The smell of sandalwood mixed with the smell of mint had a hypnotic effect that made people want to fall. She tilted her head and fell into an unknown chest. When the person who made the toast saw this, he wanted to stand up and help Hellion Vivian over, but he didn't expect to be frozen in place by Belagaju's gaze. That gaze was extremely cold, as if he dared to touch Boss, this man would take his life. "I'll send her back." Belagaju's voice was calm and emotionless. But inexplicably, they didn't dare to reject him. It had been like this ever since they made the toast just now. They clearly wanted to get this man drunk, but every time, when the wine glass was about to be handed to him, they couldn't help but feel their hearts tremble. They abruptly turned a corner and sent it to Boss. This was too fucking strange. This man clearly looked very elegant and intellectual, and he had a faint smile on his face from beginning to end, without a trace of displeasure. But they just felt their scalps go numb. Don't ask them why. Chapter 175. Master, where are we going? Originally, according to His Highness's habit, he would take a bath at this time. But today, Shadow raised his head and looked at the person in Belagaju's arms. He couldn't help but be slightly stunned. That was a woman? Shadow almost doubted if he had seen wrongly. He rubbed his eyes hard. In the eyes of outsiders, His Highness had always been elegant and noble like a god. After all, he still had the halo of a saint above his head. But only Shadow knew how cold and unapproachable His Highness was when there was no one around. Especially when he disguised himself and entered White Academy. He seemed to be politely wandering in people's eyes, but in fact, no one entered his world. Innate indifference, this was the real His Highness. One year when receiving foreign guests, the princess of the neighboring country also got drunk and insisted that His Highness personally send her off. That princess was indeed a bit rude and unreasonable. She didn't listen to anyone and even took the opportunity to wrap herself around His Highness's arm. The next day, His Highness set up a plan to let that princess marry into the most deserted courtyard. The reason was because His Highness couldn't stand that his favorite clothes were stained with the smell of alcohol by that princess. At that time, the retired emperor was so angry that he almost ordered people to hold His Highness down and give him a good beating. However, other than himself, who served His Highness all year round, only the retired emperor could see through his scheme. In short, the retired emperor was reluctant to punish His Highness, so he pulled His Highness to his side and taught him earnestly and earnestly. His Highness listened from beginning to end, and finally indifferently curved his lips. "A woman who rubbed against my body, Imperial grandfather wants me to be polite to her? Ah, I didn't kill her, that's good enough." However, His Highness unexpectedly took the initiative to hug a woman today. If this was in the past, Shadow would hardly dare to believe it. When Beligaju carried Hellion Vivian through the door, his fingers supported the side, as if he was afraid of hurting her in his arms. Shadow was just about to step forward to help support Hellion Wei Wei's body when Bailey Jiaju's cold eyes flashed past. Shadow retracted his hand as if he'd been cut, and respectfully retreated to the side. Beligaju retracted his gaze and said faintly, "You may leave." Shadow originally wanted to stay at the side and take care of Hellion Vivian. After all, His Highness had never taken care of anyone before. But when he saw Beligaju's hand wrap around the back of Hellion Vivian's head and gently lift her up, Shadow silently retreated to the side. "Arju, why did you leave halfway through the wine?" Nangong Lai, with an incomparably evil smile, walked over from afar. Looking at the person in his embrace, the corner of his eyebrows raised. "Huh? This woman's face looks pretty good like this." As he spoke, Nangong Lai wanted to reach out and push aside Hellion Vivian's bangs to take a closer look. Unexpectedly, there was a loud bang. The wooden door in front of him suddenly closed. Before Nangong Lai could react, he choked on a mouthful of dust. "Fuck. Arju, my face is ruined." However, Nangong Lai was at a loss. Why wasn't he allowed to go in with them? It was obvious that Arju didn't have any ability to take care of people. Also, where's Shadow? Nangong Lai looked left and right. Just as he was about to leave, the wooden door in front of him opened again. In front of him was Beligaju's handsome and cold face. "Go get a basin of hot water?" Nangong Lai's face was full of question marks. Nangong Jiaju thought for a moment and added, "And a towel." "Do I look like your bodyguard that much?" Nangong Lai roared. Nangong Jiaju leisurely cracked his own wrist. "Go, or not?" "Go." Nangong Lai swallowed his saliva and shifted his gaze away. As he walked, he muttered, "That's why I hate people who only know how to use martial chi to threaten people the most. Simply shameless." But to tell the truth, Nangong Lai also didn't do such a thing as fetching water. Just to find a wooden basin, he sent 3 shadows. In the end, he got a basin of hot water and proudly knocked on the door. "Look, I brought the hot water." Bang. Another sound came from the door. Nangong Lai maintained the position of holding the basin in the rising dust. His hands were already empty, leaving only a miserable expression. The bed in Hellion Vivian's boudoir was very big. Her long black hair spread out on the bright red sandalwood, giving people a kind of indescribable beauty and enchantment. Beligaju glanced at her and sat down on the edge of the wooden bed. He extended his arm and twisted the white towel. His shoulders and back extended extremely powerful curves. He leaned to one side and helped Hellion Vivian wipe the side of her face. His long eyebrows wrinkled, as if he was very unaccustomed to this kind of thing. As if she felt someone beside her, Hellion Vivian turned her body. Unexpectedly, her cheek touched Beligaju's arm. That trace of cool touch made her involuntarily rub against it. Long eyelashes covered that pair of always smiling eyes. Light-colored thin lips slightly pursed. Black long hair scattered all around, making her whole face indescribably soft. Drops of sparkling and translucent water slid down her cheeks and finally hid under her pure white robe, causing people to daydream. Beligaju felt as if he had been scratched by something. It was a little itchy, and there was an unknown thirst. His gaze fell on her light and soft lips. His eyes darkened. His slender fingers followed Hellion Vivian's cheek and gently pressed down. The touch was the same as in his memory. A burning sensation spread from his fingertips to his chest, as if something was swelling up. Belaguju's eyes darkened even more. This made him look more dangerous than usual. In the quiet room, one could hear Hellion Vivian's light breathing. Then, even the sound of breathing stopped. Because Bailey Georgiou leaned over, his pair of dark eyes became more and more unfathomable as his thin lips touched her moist lips. Oh! Hellion Vivian gently wrinkled her long, shapely eyebrows. Belaguju directly stuck out the tip of his tongue and gently traced the beautiful shape of her lips. That soft and smooth touch made him almost forget to leave. He continued to linger for a while. Understanding the principle of stopping while he was ahead, he stood up with a faint smile and looked at her slightly wrinkled clothes. He quickly reached out and pulled off Hellion Vivian's robe that reeked of alcohol. He glanced at her white collarbone. He saw it more clearly than that day in the forest. Her skin was warm and slightly cool like jade. It was porcelain white without any blemishes. It was as if a light touch would print a red mark. Bailey Georgiou's eyes followed her neckline downwards, his slender fingers unhurriedly undid the cloth around her waist, not the slightest trace of politeness. He tore open that eyesore of a robe. Under the messy pure white clothes, other than her black hair that was as soft as ink, Wei Wei's entire body's skin seemed to be suffused with a layer of soft light. Her delicate and beautiful collarbone, her slender and perfectly straight legs, were unreservedly presented in front of Bailey Georgiou's eyes. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.